So a very good morning to day 2 of the National Council of Provinces Provincial Week, where we are investigating and interrogating the challenges that confronts the time-years delivery of public infrastructure, viable public infrastructure to members of the community. I'm going to start with introductions. My name is Rikus Badenhorst, Permanent Delegate for the Western Cape. To my left.
Good morning, everyone. Derek Wessels, Chairperson of the Standing Committee Infrastructure.
Good morning, everyone. Nicholas Gotzel. I'm a Permanent Delegate for the NCOP from the DA.
Good morning. Paul Swart, Permanent Delegate, Western Cape, NCOP.
Good morning, Bino Palmer, Permanent Delegate of the Western Cape. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Matura Baines, Permanent Delegate in NCOP.
Good morning, Mobile Dinge from Infrastructure South Africa.
Good morning, I'm Nikita Anson from the National Council of Provinces.
Good morning, Chairperson Jason Cleophas, Procedural Officer, Western Cape.
Good morning, Chair. Shihlamar Songobeni, Parliamentary Communication Services. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair. All protocol observed. I'm Loiso Njamela, responsible for IGR Salga Western Cape office. Thank you.
Good morning, Chairperson, honourable members. I'm Donovan Hubert, Salga Western Cape Chairperson. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Pogiso Molapo from the City of Cape Town, Human Settlements Department.
Good morning, Chairperson. Good morning, members. Lawrence Valeta, City of Cape Town, Human Settlements.
Good morning, Chairperson. My name is Neil Joseph. I'm a Project Officer, Department of Infrastructure.
Good morning, Chairperson and honorable members. It's Lindelo Mabuntane, Department of Infrastructure.
Morning, Chair and members. Gavin Wiseman, Director, Affordable Housing within the Department of Infrastructure.
Good morning, Chair. Morning, members. Ndobe Gombingileli, Secretary to Leader of Government Business, and also just extend the apologies of the MEC Simmers, who could not join us today due to prior commitments in the Provincial Parliament.
Good morning, I'm Shanice. I'm the Procedural Officer for the Standing Committee on Infrastructure.
Who's online? Just want to welcome on the online platform. I see Member Lekker from the Legislature is also online. Very welcome. And we note the apologies of the Minister. Thank you very much. Just house rules. Please feel free during the presentations if you need to use the facilities outside the door, you know where it is. Please keep your microphone switched off if you have your computers open because there's feedback on the system. Please keep your cell phones on mute if you don't mind. And then any of the online delegates, please raise their hands if they wish to ask a question. What we'll do this morning is we'll go through there's 3 presentations. We'll handle all 3 of the presentations. Please make your notes as we go along, and then we'll do a question and answer session after the 3 presentations, which should take us up to about 12 o'clock. We will break for lunch. And then after 12, same as yesterday, we'll meet at the bottom, at the back of the building, and then depart on our site visits. Great, let's start. Just recap. Yesterday, we looked at the direct and indirect effects of unlawful occupation of land and the influence that has on providing public infrastructure to our communities. We also looked at the PI Act and investigated the deficiencies within. As you know, we are legislators in the NCOP, and our job is to look at legislation and which bottlenecks are caused in legislation to look at the repairing that legislation. So we appreciate the fact that we were able to look at the PI Act yesterday and go and look at the consequences of some of the effects of the PI Act. Good. So this morning we'll commence with the presentation of the Conradi Better Living Model, followed by the presentation on Maitland Mews, and then we'll conclude with the presentation on Goodwood Station. So the Department of Infrastructure would be first up. Thank you very much. You may continue. Members, you have received hard copies of the 3 presentations. Please just look after them. There are no spare copies. Thanks. Members, your Conradi model briefing is in yesterday's pack. For those online, thank you for your patience. We're just setting up the presentation quickly. Thanks.
Honorable Chair, honorable members, I will present the Conradi Better Living Model with my colleague here, Neil Joseph. And then Gavin Wiseman on my left will pick up the details more on the social housing offering of Conradi. Just the contents of our presentation, we will give you an introduction, which is a background on how Conradi came about, where it is located, the development concept and the delivery mechanism that was decided upon, as well as progress to date, including funding, the risks that we've been dealing with and mitigating, as well as lessons learned through the delivery of this project. So Conradi is one of the provincial game changer projects, which was identified in 2014 when the Western Cape government embarked on 7 priority interventions. On the right, you see the different 7 game changers, which were addressing skills, energy, broadband, e-learning, after school, and better living model, alcohol harms and reduction. And Conradi is one of the game changers. And it was about being a catalyst for improving people's lives through accelerated growth, job creation, and social inclusion. The motivation and objectives of Conradi, in partnership with the city of Cape Town, as well as the private sector, we aim to develop a better living model exemplar on a piece of land owned by the Western Cape government, or under the custodianship of the Western Cape government, which is well located within the Cape Metro area to support positive social and economic spatial integration. And this was an exemplar model that we wanted to also learn from it so that we can replicate throughout the province. And its objectives and outcomes were as an integrated development, which promotes live, work, play, and learn attributes, close to school, mixed income, housing development, mixed use, work opportunities, safe and secure and workable. It seeks to redress imbalances aligned with SPLUMA and spatial transformation. It uses state land, as in the land that's in the custodianship of the Western Cape, which is well located. You will see when I get to the location just how well located the site is. It seeks to provide access to affordable housing opportunities in an integrated manner. And as I said, that it promotes a vibrant, safe, live, work, and play attributes. So in terms of the locality, the project is in the Pinelands area. If you know the old Mutual head office in Pinelands, it is just across that site. What you see in that red spot there, that's where Conradi is, and it's about 15 kilometers from the CBD. So that is the regional context. Then on the local context, you will see that strangely shaped yellow marker there, that's where the site is. It is a former hospital. It is next to Pinelands, Maitland, Epic, and Thornton. This is the site itself. Of course, it doesn't look this way anymore. It's 22 hectares in size. It is a former Conradi hospital. And as I said, that it is or was identified as a pilot exemplar for the better living model. And I've also just indicated what the objectives of the exemplar model were about. So this is the development concept. So the development concept that was developed was that it must be a mixed use and mixed income development, residentially led, which basically meant it needed to incorporate subsidized housing opportunities as well as open market, retail, commercial, service industry, office, sports and recreation, as well as education and other facilities. Recreation and sporting and stormwater attenuation, open systems on the southern side of the site, upgrading of Forest Drive extension to improve access to the site and surrounding, the connection to Fort Trekker Road and the railway line through Maitland Cemetery, and the adaptive use of the heritage structure that was or is in the property. So this is the development concept that was approved through the land use management submissions to the city and their rezoning applications. The delivery mechanism, we also needed to look at how we would deliver this project, because it is mixed use. It is not just human settlements which would be delivered under the former Human Settlements Department, but it includes open market and it includes open commercial. But at the same time, as a department, we are not in the business of developing such developments. We also did not want to sell the land outright because we needed to make sure that the objectives of the development that were set up front were actually achieved. And then a decision was that we will utilize the land availability and development agreement to source and procure a developer that would then take the property and develop it, with the department making available the land. So not on a free basis, but developing it with delayed payment into the department. There were conditions that the developer had to adhere by. First being complying with the rezoning conditions that were the conditions for the approval. Delivery of a minimum 3,500 residential units, at least 49% of those being grant-funded opportunities comprising of social housing and FLISP, and construction of at least for 750 residential units in the first phase of the project. And this is quite important because we wanted to show commitment and delivery, especially for the less privileged members of our society. So we had to make sure that the first delivery or the first phase focuses on social housing more than anything. We also had to comply with the record of decision from Heritage Western Cape, and a number of conditions that are here. Delivered 2 independent schools because of the bulk of the threshold of people that were going to be provided for in the development. A need for a school was identified and was part of the development concept, and therefore the developer had to provide for 2 schools in the development. So progress to date, I'm not going to delve much on the bulk infrastructure. I think as any other development, if you saw how the site was in the previous photo that I shown, so there had to be construction of bulk infrastructure in terms of roads, in terms of electrics, in terms of landscaping, in terms of water, sewage. Most of that is complete. At 100%, we are now sitting with the urban landscaping at 85% complete, as well as the Grand Park landscaping complete at 85%. I'll talk about the Aerodrome Link Road. We are at design stages of one of the three complete, except for that Aerodrome Link Road, which is still in the process. There were issues that we needed to deal with, which I'll touch on the Aerodrome Link Road, which was a condition of the Municipal Planning Tribunal's approval. So this, as far as bulk infrastructure and earthworks, this is what has been achieved thus far. Those are the roads and all the bulk services that had to be provided on the site. As far as progress on the residential units, what has achieved so far, social housing is being administered by a social housing institute. In this case, it is Own Haven. Phase 1, 4 blocks were constructed, totaling 432 residential units, and all 4 blocks are completed and are fully occupied. The second phase is 659 units, and it is currently in construction, and this was delayed mainly because SHRA had to approve the geotechnical costs, which I think maybe Gavin will touch about in terms of the challenges that we have, especially in the Western Cape, and I'm sure some other provinces when it comes to the geotechnical costs and how those need to be absorbed in the construction and how they impact on the cost for provision of social housing. Then on the FLISP residential, the first building had 266 residential units. It's been constructed, completed, and it's being transferred to owners. The second building with 61 residential units, construction is completed and also being transferred to owners. And the third building, comprising 108 units, is currently in sales. Then the third component of residential is open market. 2 blocks with 230 units is complete and transferred to owners. The third block with 158 units is currently in sales. And I think I must say here that COVID-19 and lockdown and the subsequent hikes related to interest rates and just people losing incomes did impact or changing their priorities in terms of what they were going to use the disposable income on, did have impact on the sales. Hence, the sales, especially for the open market, went very slow. These are just the photos of what you see now. I think what I want to emphasize here, if you look at this development, it's very tenure blind. When you look here, you don't know what is open market, what is social housing, you don't know who is the high income earner or not. And this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to provide an integrated mixed use and mixed income housing. And I know that there's this perception that social housing devalues property values, and that is not the case. And in fact, the City of Cape Town had done a study to look at the impact of social housing in property values, and they found that there is no negative impact. And we've seen it in Conradi that there is no negative impact. They can sit together, and as long as they are tenure blind, so that you do not differentiate how they look like. So this is the what you will see this afternoon when you get to Conradi. You can see the tenure blindness in the buildings. That is Conradi. just the residential. The other component of it, as I indicated, is commercial and other land uses. So there is a retail center. When you have a development of that nature, you probably need to provide for your residents to be able to shop, and it is a live, work, and play. So people need to work and need to be able to live, and such facilities must be provided. Hence, there is a retail center that is in the process of being built. We've also, as far as play is concerned, proposed a sports complex, and that is what is also being constructed. That building you see at the bottom there is the heritage building, which is being converted or has been converted into a community hall for the residents of Conradi. As far as job opportunities are concerned, the number of SMEs that have received or have participated in Conradi is just over 90. Number of jobs that have been created for skilled, semi-skilled, and unskilled labor is about 1,500. And the number of jobs created as part of the drug rehabilitation and for former ex-offenders, it's 26. We have also provided for training opportunities within Conradi during construction. Thus far, 31 SMMEs have received training and about 214 individuals have received training. Now, I'll speak about the funding of the project. So the whole process of de-risking the property and enabling the property to get the development rights and the rezoning and packaging it and sourcing a developer, that was funded solely by the Department of Transport and Public Works at the time, DOI currently. The implementation of the project itself, especially the affordable and subsidized housing, came from the Human Settlements and the City of Cape Town, and the City of Cape Town also provided USDG funding in the amount of about 221, and the table below just shows the amount of money as far as subsidies are concerned, with the USDG for bulk services at 220 million, electrical services at 55 million, and human settlements grants at 118 million. But I also need to emphasize that one of the positive and attributes around this being a mixed-use development is that the open market and the commercial is able to cross-subsidize social housing. And that's the model that we are replicating in other properties and projects, especially because of the quantum of the social housing subsidy, as well as the price of the land, where it would have been difficult to provide for social housing, but because there is cross-subsidization that then supplements whatever shortfall that was there. Risks that we've had to deal with. I mentioned the issue of the aerodrome. So as one of the conditions for the approval of rezoning was that the development had to construct a bridge, and we needed to register that as a servitude. Now, we had a number of challenges there because, one, the bridge had to go over private land, which was neither owned by the province or by the city. So there had to be acquisition of that land that caused a number of delays. In addition to that, we also found, or the developer found, that there were actually services underneath which the city did not have knowledge of. So there were a number of delays. However, those have been resolved, and Now it's no longer really a risk because we've been able to mitigate that risk with the acquisition as well as the discovery and the plans to relocate those services. I mentioned the issue around interest rates, which really have slowed down the sales, especially for open market sales. I think during 2020 to 2022, we had a really, well, there was the COVID, and then when units were put on the market, we really had experienced a very slow pace in the uptake of open market. One of the social services that have to be provided on the site besides the clinic is it's a school. The developer has had a few challenges with the school because in this development, the Department of Education indicated that they would not be providing a school because as far as their planning is concerned, they've got enough or sufficient public schools in the area of Pinelands. Therefore, the developer had to develop or provide for a school, and had to get private school operators. And there have been challenges because I think also with the issue of COVID, some of the private operators of schools have also had challenges because they've had various discussions with the Curos, with Sparks, and have really had challenges which also have had implications that we needed to extend the deadline because they needed to have had a school operational by next year when a number of units, a certain number of units have been, that have been sold has been reached. We have had, they've had success in the recent few months that they are signing a contract with an independent operator for a school currently, and it might, both schools might actually now happen at the same time because Old Mutual is also coming to party to provide for a school. Lessons learned. I think one of the lessons that we've learned is that political support in these kind of projects is quite critical because this was a game changer and an exemplar. It received quite a significant of support politically, both from Western Cape government as well as the city of Cape Town. And it made things easy to address challenges that were experienced by the project. One of the things also that we've understood, and it's a lesson that we're taking to the other projects of this nature, is that these projects are quite complicated. They are not easy at all because you've got private sector funding, you've got the city, you've got a number of imperatives that you're needing to look at, and how do you package. I think the de-risking part is easy. Acquisition of development rights is easy, but the concept itself, how do you make it financially viable? Because we're not developing it. The developer, the private sector, has to be attracted to the development that we're proposing, and they need to be able to raise funding for such development. So it really does need competent project management, and we've been fortunate that the project managers that we've employed for this particular project have really excelled and assisted a lot in ensuring that we actually achieve the objectives of this project. I think also the fact that we really focused and defined scope and managed the enablement and the de-risking ourselves as the department, it assisted, because one of the things that we know is that the private sector, if you have a piece of land and you say, here's a piece of land, develop it, they usually don't see it attractive if it doesn't have the appropriate rights, because they know the time it takes to acquire the rights and the risks that are that are associated with the land that is probably not protected, not fenced, with unlawful occupation, as well as the costs that are associated with just holding that land. So the work that we put in, which was about 3 years just to get the de-risking elements in place and giving the developer land that already has a basket of rights, land that already has all the approvals from City of Cape Town as well as Heritage Western Cape, that made it easy for them to be able to take the project, raise their finances, and be able to develop. I can't stress the importance of intergovernmental cooperation enough. I think the colleagues from the city that we've been working with on this project can attest to that. Without that intergovernmental cooperation, I don't think this project would have been as successful as it is at the moment. It's not just about the USDG funding and any funding that they've provided. It goes beyond that. It includes the support, it includes the advice, it includes them making input throughout the process. And what we had done from the beginning was to have a steering committee, which included officials from the city, because we saw this as co-development. It was not just, yes, it was a provincial project, but we saw it as a co-development, and the city did not only play its mandated role of being the approvers for any submissions or applications we submit to them for land use management or the USDG funding, but they went above and beyond in providing advice and providing support. And we see that, and we've taken that forward also to other projects, so that we make sure that from the inception, as we start and initiate the projects, we actually have the city together. Financial feasibility. I think I've mentioned that we cannot have expectations without testing their financial viability, because we do not develop these projects. They get developed by the private sector. So we had to do a financial testing of the concept and make sure that we balance what we were asking from the developer as far as non-commercial uses, where they would be able to get money from the open market as well as other uses, with the socio-economic objectives of government, your subsidized housing and the schools and education. So we needed to come with a financial model that would make sense, that we achieve the social objectives that government is mandated for through the development, but at the same time, the developer, it must make financial sense for them. So it's quite critical that the financial modeling is done during the de-risking, and it makes sense for both parties, that whatever conditions we put on development, they don't necessarily cripple the developer, because it then makes the development non-attractive. We have had to relook the delivery mechanism, our land availability and development agreement. It is not a bad delivery mechanism. I think the only challenge that we had, which was not our challenge really, it was the developer's challenge. The developer could not, at some point down the line, it had some cash flow challenges and needed to raise more funding. Now, the challenge that it had, if you remember what I said, that with this delivery mechanism, the land was not sold to the developer outright. So the department or the Western Cape government kept the land, but released as portions as the money came in and the developer was paying funds into the Western Cape government. Now, the challenge that the developer had was that when it wanted to raise funding for its cash flow, some of the entities that it had approached said, but well, you don't own the land. How can we give you money when you actually don't own the land? What is collateral? And we've had to look at how do we make that aspect easy for developers to be able to raise funding, while at the same time we are able to still have some level of control that the conditions that we've put in for developing and making this property available are achieved. Now, as I close, Chairperson and members, just on the land assembly, and something that I think Gavin is going to touch on, as I said, that this was an exemplar project. We've got quite a few that are in the planning process. Some of them you'll be hearing about them in the next few months, and I'm not at liberty to speak about them at this moment. But the challenge is that if we are not able to raise funding, especially for your subsidized housing opportunities, then we're not going to be able to replicate these projects. Because if TRA does not get the funding or does not have the funding that is required, especially for social housing, then the dream of spatial integration, of spatial justice, of us providing housing opportunities in well-located properties within the city of Cape Town is just going to be a dream. And I think at a forum like this, especially a political forum, this needs to be raised, because when debates come, it becomes that government and us officials, we have not delivered, when in actual fact, Gavin, as affordable housing responsible person, is not going to be able to deliver because there's no money to deliver. And I think if this House has and we plead that this is something that needs to be looked at, because even if we're not able to get the funding, the projects that I've mentioned, that I've said you will see us talking about, they will be out there in the next few months. They're not going to be there in the next 4 months, and it would not be because I've lied about it. It will be because we are not able to put them out there, because they are not going to be attractive to the market, because we cannot ask the market to then do what we are supposed to do as government, and we are not able to do it because we already asked the market to cross-subsidize, but they are cross-subsidizing and supplementing from a base. And if we go to the market without the base, then the projects are not going to fly at all. They won't even take up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lindelwa. Sorry, I'm using your first name. I haven't got your surname on the program. Thank you very much for that presentation. I think takeaways immediately is political support, sustainability. You have to have a financial model that works for all the parties, and there must be intergovernmental cooperation. I mean, this project started with the Department of Public Works and Infrastructure, got provincial support, and the City of Cape Town obviously played their role as well. So thank you very much for that presentation. Colleagues? I just wanted to quickly take a break and wish Mr. Pochenpoel a very happy birthday. We wish you all the best for your life, for your year ahead. Let's move on to the next presentation. I believe that's Maitland Muse. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chair. We just got to sort out the tech here quickly. I'm logging in, but I just need to be let into the meeting. I'm not sure if somebody's tech savvy can help.
No, you have to log in because it's here.
No, just trying to. Just
open it here.
Oh, thanks.
Colleagues, you'll see the Maitland Muse is in the pack that you got this morning. It's a green cover.
I'm trying to get in. Can't get in. Wait, is this someone else's meeting? Sorry. Thanks, colleagues. Sorry about that delay. The tech. When tech works, it's great. When it doesn't, ish. All right. Colleagues, members, Chair, thanks so much for this opportunity just to present a little bit about what we're very passionate about. But yeah, just to give a little bit more detail. So just a bit of context with previously branch human settlements now merged with Department of Infrastructure. We now branch human settlements within infrastructure. In the Affordable Housing Directorate, we essentially run two programs. The one's a rental form of tenure, the other is an ownership form of tenure, and the social housing element fits very much into the rental form of tenure. So I'll be doing a little bit of a deep dive into the projects themselves. We will start with the Conradi Park project itself. There's a social housing element within that, which I'll cover, and then we'll touch on two other projects that have also been implemented, and those all three form part of your site visits for later or after lunch. So in terms of the Conradi Park project, my colleague Lynn has done the broader context of it. But
Sorry, Gavin. I just want to, colleagues, we're going to start with this blue pack that you got yesterday. You'll see it says National Council of Provinces, Provincial Week 2024, Social Housing Projects. Little red square on the top right-hand corner of the pack. You all got it? Great, thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Thank you. So as Linda was mentioning, the social housing element formed a key component of the overall vision for the broader Conradi Park project. And I think this is where the idea of partnership is a really important element to bring to the fore. So part of the bid that was put out for this development of the site required that the developer partner with then what they call a social housing institution, which, and again, in terms of all these acronyms and lingos, it's a whole language in itself, but we speak about the SHRA, which is the Social Housing Regulatory Authority, which is it's an instrument of national government, Department of Human Settlements, to manage and fund or manage the funding of the social housing program, as well as the regularization of it. So institutions become fully accredited. In other words, they meet certain requirements around operations, governance, and those types of things. So in this instance, the awarded developer Concor engaged with Ownhaven, which is an accredited social housing institution, which was based out of East London, but had a growing footprint into the Western Cape. And through that agreement, that formed part of the bid. And I think, again, it just shows the innovation around procurement and how innovative the province has been in terms of that. And I think the learnings are always there. And I think it's how do we take partnership forward into different phases of future development. So the essence of the social housing formed a very key component of the overall delivery. And in this project, there's three planned phases. The first two are being implemented, but to take it to a total of 1,236 social housing units. And then a further 327 in this presentation is called the FLISP, First Home Finance Program. Now it's called, Finance Linked Institutional Subsidy Program. Now it's called First Home Finance, which again, both the social housing model and the FLISP model serve folk earning below 22,000 Rand. And I'll come back to that a little bit later. But basically a very fully integrated project. It includes an early childhood development component, and when you'll see on the site that a lovely creche has been included as part of the social housing. It's integrated in terms of some of the social housing blocks. You'll see too, it's very much a pedestrian-orientated precinct, and the overall landscaping, the overall feel of the development is so key to create well-defined, defendable, well-curated public open space, and precinct is absolutely critical to a sense of lifestyle and living standard. And I think Conradi has been excellent in terms of that, which you will see. This, not to get too stuck in the numbers, but at the end of the day, it is a numbers game. So there been these, the phase 1 has been completed and they're currently under construction with the phase 2. But just to give you an idea of the magnitude, so the phase 1 is 432 units, totaling close to 200 million rand, and recognizing this is just the development itself of the social housing component. And then phase 2 is a total of 326 odd million, which is 659 units. Part of the importance of how these projects are put together is what we would call land enablement. And so what has happened in this transaction is that there's been a separate subdivisional area where the social housing is taking place, because Lindawa spoke to it earlier, the importance of funding securitization. And so the SHRA attaches what they call a notarial deed of restriction to ensure any sort of recourse in terms of this funding that's disbursed against the institution itself. So ideally, any social development needs to be on a separate earth, essentially, that the SHRA then attaches these notarial deeds to. And in this instance, the debt finance came to the National Housing Finance Corporation. They also take a bond over the property. So those are all the mechanisms that one needs to be aware of up front to enable these developments to go ahead. And then there was as was mentioned, the province out of the Department of Human Settlements had put a large amount of money into enable the overall site. But there was additional funding put in by the City of Cape Town from their special operating account. And then there was also a further geotechnical variance. This is quite an issue for us in the Western Cape, this geotechnical variance. It's additional subsidy that gets made available due to certain geotechnical conditions that we experience. And the biggest one, and I think some folk might not know this, but we're within a seismic zone. And so the buildings have to be designed and developed in a certain way to resist any possible seismic event. And it has quite a significant cost implication when you're going multi-story. And we've had a long debate, and we've advocated for this for many years, and we're in those processes with the SHRA itself, with the National Department at their policy division, because particularly for us in the Western Cape, it has a huge cost implication. So for these 2 phases, we were able to secure additional geotechnical variance, and that's an ongoing process. And the institutions themselves have also inserted their own equity as well to get the overall viability to work. Just to give you a high-level idea of the typologies, the social housing model, what the beauty of it is, it creates its own cross-subsidization within the model itself. And I think what perhaps people don't realize is that units are being made available to folk on very low income. The income range for social housing extends from 1,850 Rand up to 22,000 Rand, of which 30% of the units have to be allocated to folk earning below 6,700 Rand. And of that 30%, 10% has to go to folk earning below 5,500 Rand. So in many of these projects, you'll hear testimony of folk that have actually come out of backyard shacks, out of very dire straits, to be able to obtain a well-located, safe, lovely new rental unit in a very beautifully landscaped, defined precinct. And so that's why we're so passionate about social housing, because it's really the one and only program within human settlements currently that it really does allow for social economic reintegration and addressing spatial segregation and historic spatial injustice. And I'll touch on that later, but I think that's why this program is so key. And so you'll see the range of units that are provided: bachelor or studio, 1 bed, 2 bed, and some 3 beds. And then those are typically assigned to folk as the income goes up. And then the more top-end units, if I can use that word, where you have higher rentals, those then in fact cross-subsidize the operational costs of the lower-end units. It costs around about 1,400 Rand per month per unit to manage effectively. And so you'll see with those lower rentals of 750 Rand, you're not even covering your ops costs. For a large portion of the units, you're not covering your ops costs. So the cross-subsidization happens within the mechanism of the model itself, and that's part of the beauty of it. And so that ensures long-term sustainability. My city colleagues can attest to the community residential unit program, where they're running tremendous deficits, where the units just aren't viable because of the non-repayment and a whole host of other things. The majority of these projects run at about a 98, 95% repayment rate. In some instances, over 100%, where they've been able to deal with outstanding arrears. So that again is a marked benefit of the program. So both the phases, it gives you an idea of rental, and generally the top end rentals, there's normally a significant discount compared to a similar unit in a private sector type development. And again, that's where the demand remains high. And the institutions are battling at the moment with affordability. It's happening across the sector post-COVID. The whole property sector has taken strain, and so the institutions are needing, it's a dynamic process in terms of ensuring units are occupied and tenanted with quality tenants. And that's all part of the management of this precinct, and hence the importance of having a well-established social housing institution implement. I won't go into too much detail here, members. We've spoken about the landscape, and you'll see it very well landscaped, soft and hard landscaping. It's a really beautiful precinct. They're dealing with water and energy efficiency is key. There's recycled water usage. There's uses of alternative energies, PV, solar, centralized heat pump systems. There's anything to ensure sustainability from an energy point of view. There's certainly provision for units for the disabled, and some of those modifications vary. Communal areas are key. You'll see again from the typology design where there's visible play areas. That's all key for family safety, for the kids to play safely, for the moms to keep an eye on them. Washing lines, that's also quite a contentious issue in these projects, but it's all part of good design. The real good upside here is access to Wi-Fi connectivity, and again with younger generations around online learning, just access to job markets, to online platforms. This is all integrated now into the unit itself. So if you can understand the benefit and the environment that these projects create for folk that might well have been in an informal settlement somewhere, it's a massive change. It'll have sort of legacy and lifetime changes available to them. Security is key. The overall Conradi Park precinct is an open precinct, but each of the social housing blocks itself has its own independent security system with strong access control, biometrics, facial recognition. And again, this is just to ensure the safety of the tenants, but also to ensure proper tenanting. The complexity of subletting, overcrowding, all those elements has to be very, very firmly managed. And again, with the top end technology is being used in these projects to ensure that. These are just some photos where you can start to see the massing and the detailing. These are the phase one. There were 4 blocks completed in terms of that, and you can see that it's sort of, we call it the donut. It's sort of the blocks are built like a square donut, if you understand, and then inside you have beautiful landscaped play areas and landscaping. Again, it just speaks to design and clever design, which is so important. That just gives you an idea of some of the inner courtyard. This was obviously sort of, just the importance of sustainability. So they've actually used artificial grass in some of these instances, just again from a water saving measure. These are the new blocks that are currently going up in terms of phase 2. They're doing another 2 4-story blocks. The 4-story has been the normative sort of design. But what's exciting about this project is, for the first time in the Cape Town context, they're able to do a tower block. Neil, is it 8 stories? Yeah, so they're doing 2 8-story tower blocks, which is unique for Cape Town. It obviously has had its own costing implications in terms of foundation solution. The geotechnical conditions on the sites were not great. But this is, Lindalva spoke to this, there's an element of cross-subsidization that the overall developer is bringing into these units to ensure this level of typology. Because typically, if you're building multi-story over 4 stories, you're incurring extra cost. But it's something we have to look at going forward if we want to look at proper densification. So this is exciting. It'd be fantastic to get these 2 blocks completed and on the ground. There again gives a sense of the massing. It's going to have absolutely incredible views of Table Mount and the peninsula. Those top units are almost penthouse type units. So that's the Conradi project. Again, you'll see the different forms and design, and each of the projects is unique. Maitland Muse has presented an exciting different opportunity. It's 204 units, and it's implemented by an again accredited SHR called Madula Moho Housing Association. They originally had a footprint up in Gauteng, but then have come down into the Western Cape space. They've had extensive experience again within the sector. And I think it's just maybe to note that all these institutions we're looking at here are what they call, they're all non-profit companies. And so their core business is affordable housing, and that also has its own benefits. The site originally was an old parking area. It was released by the city historically to private developers to try and do open market type units. It was actually to the banks, I think, but that all fell through eventually. And through a long process of negotiation, the city still prioritized the site for affordable housing in the form of social housing. And ultimately, the city then released the land to I think was the original developer, Calgo M3, who in partnership then, like Concord did with Ownhaven for Conradi, then undertook this development. And they've done a great job of it. So again, the site itself is very dense, but again, you'll get a sense of the urban form. Again, just speaking to the main funding streams, it's what they call the consolidated capital grant. That's the amount of about 425,000 Rand per unit that the Social Housing Regulatory Authority makes available for capital costs to develop the units. The main debt funder into the sector currently still is the National Housing Finance Corporation. And then in this case, too, the institution was able to leverage the USDG funding from the city. And again, quite an extensive amount of its own equity put into the development. Again, similar typology. And again, just to note that the SHRA itself requires a spread of units across the income band. So you can't just load it for the top end units. So typically the unit typology then speaks to rental, and then that speaks to the 5 tiers of income segmentation that one has to provide for. And so you're really ensuring an opportunity to folk across that income spread from 1,850 up to 22,000. And these just again give you a sense of the types of rentals being charged. You know, someone renting a shack somewhere could easily be paying over 1,200, and here, you know, you can get a beautiful self-contained studio for 650 Rand a month. Again, you'll see the landscaping, you'll see the play areas, you'll see the various facilities. What's exciting about this project is, you'll see it later in the photos, they've been able to create an active urban edge where the unit backs onto Voortrekker Road. They're actually using that for some community-based projects where they're rehabilitating folk off the street, putting them through training programs. There's also a U-Turn, which is an NGO that works with street people. They have their own shop there. They sell second-hand goods. So again, it really creates an integrated community. And again, it speaks to the communal areas, security. They all follow a very similar pattern in terms of that and methodology. This project too forms part of the broader Maitland Metro regeneration node, and there's a number of developments that are happening in that area. Very well located, very close to town, very close to a host of opportunities. And again, I think that speaks to the capacity of social housing to really provide affordable rental opportunities in well-located land parcels where folk historically have been very much excluded. You'll see on that photograph, that's on the right bottom corner, that's Voortrekker Road going towards, you can see Lions Head way in the background. That active edge on the left where those people are standing, those are all, that sort of creates the active urban edge. And then they were able to do the massing of 4 stories within this precinct. That again just shows some of the built form and the typology. The city were very involved in terms of the urban design and, had quite a big input into the site development plan. That again just shows you the types of blocks and typologies that typically is done. The most sort of cost-effective we do find is sort of a 4-story block. You don't need lifts for a 4-story block, and that really sort of caps it out from a height perspective as well as density. And then lastly, members, the Goodwood Station project, again, this is a very different context, but again, one that has been enabled through partnership. In this instance, PRASA, through a land availability agreement process, made land available at a number of its key stations to a new social housing institution called DCI, Community Housing. And one of those precincts was underutilized land along the Goodwood Station on both sides of the station. On the south, where it backs onto the Grand West Casino, and then obviously on the road, Voortrekker Road side, where there was open space. So I think again it just speaks about partnership. This is an extensive project. It's over 1,000 units, and you can see the build cost has been almost R500 million. It's had its own challenges with extensive delays, and everybody's worked very, very hard to finally get this on the ground, and it's actually been completed. Infrastructure Fund SA came in with the loan facility on this development, which really was the ultimate enabler to have it undertaken. Again, a substantial contribution from the city in terms of its own USDG funding, and then its own equity and revenue made up the overall project funding for the development. Again, it just speaks to the different typologies. In this instance, again, the types of income ranges that it's working with. I think that the top-end rentals, interestingly enough, that's where some of the institutions are struggling the most to get quality tenants, because that towards the top end from about 15, 16,000 up to 22 seems to be where folk are the most indebted. And that is becoming a growing issue for the sector. And again, just, excellent opportunities to a host of facilities, hospitals, schools, retail opportunities, libraries, community health. They're all in very close proximity. You're on Goodwood, you're on Voortrekker Road, taxi routes, and the like. You're right at the station. Again, there's provision of open space, although it's fairly limited in this context. Landscaping, paving, again, those all speak to the overall feel of the precinct. And then again, centralized hot water heating systems and whatever other means of efficient design have been incorporated. And then again, disability provision for units, and then obviously security. We can't understate the importance of security, and particularly in this precinct, it's been vital. There's very tight security, and sometimes, obviously, any security comes with, it's not always convenient. And I think there has been a little bit pushback from some of the tenants, perhaps, but if you've got over 1,000 units in a precinct, you can't sort of let every Uber driver through your gate or every 60 minutes from checkers come through your gate to meet you. So there is a learning, but again, security has and is absolutely paramount on all of these developments. This just gives you a sense of the massing. Obviously, the very narrow, long site. So they've worked hard to try and get some levels of sort of urban design and feel to the unit, but that does give you a sense of the massing to get the number of units. This again, sort of their guardhouse, access control, gives you the idea of the type of management that has to be done. This is one of the urban parks or play areas within the overall development. Lynn Delwa, my colleague, did speak to this, and I think, again, she did frame it very well. And I put up this slide, so it's a little bit small. The challenge for us is within the social housing program, and if people can squint their eyes and just try and look at the little colors at the bottom, you'll see there are these tiny little yellow slithers at the bottom of the graph, which is really the provision from Vote 8 from the National Department of Human Settlements budget to the social housing program. It's only around about 3% of the total funding allocation that goes to the various human settlement programs. And what that's led to is, I would argue, and obviously we're very passionate about social housing for all the reasons that I've listed, is that there needs to be a significant greater allocation in our minds to the social housing program. It's the only program that allows proper social economic integration, proper restructuring of cities, proper well-located land parcels being available to folk that historically were disadvantaged. Yet you can see the emphasis from the national department, it's not the same really. The grey represents the upgrading of informal settlements, the orange represents the integrated residential development program, the old historic B&G type approach. Now, on every platform that I've been on recently, we've been trying to advocate for this and trying to ascertain where and how and whom makes the decision as to what program gets what level of allocation. And that, members, if you could possibly take one thing away from this interaction, would be feedback for us as to where and how that decision's made. We've already heard rumors as to the now calling the medium-term development plan, as I understand it, for the next 5 years. It's replacing the MTSF. Now it's the MTDP, as I understand it. Again, the numbers for social housing seem very, very low. Someone rumored about 12,000 units over the next 5 years. We alone at the province have over 10,000 opportunities we could deliver over the next 5 or 6 years. They're close to just over the next till the end of 27, we could deliver over close to 8,000 units, requiring a 3.3 billion rands worth of capital grant subsidy. The total allocation annually to the SHRA is only about 700 or 800 million. So these are packaged projects. These are on the pipeline. They're packaged. They're ready to fly. Yet now we find ourselves stuck. This slide alone is very telling. Currently, we have 7 projects sitting on the desks of the SHRA that are fully packaged, land use rights in place. The work has been done. Majority of those are in the city of Cape Town. One, Mossel Bay, Mountain View, is the first project, or not, there's one in Drakensberg at the moment, but one of the first down the garden routes that are ready, yet there's no funding. Almost 3,000 units are sitting there that could go to ground literally in months. And I think that's to the tune of close to 1.2 billion rands worth of CCG funding. So we're really pulling our hair out. My colleague Lindal was referenced to a number of other key inner city sites that have been packaged and ready to go to market. But if we can't give developers levels of certainty as to the element of funding, it really becomes, it becomes a very difficult process where we know they wouldn't almost be able to perform because of lack of funding. So I think really from our side, it's if this could go back to the national colleagues, to the national parliament, to whoever Vote 8 gets decided and the program content get resolved within that, we would really plea for additional funding being allocated to the social housing program. I know the SHRA itself has have deliberations with National Treasury. I don't know the outcome of that. There's been no clear directive yet from the SHRA as to what they're going to do. I know Infrastructure Fund have been involved as well with some deliberation, but this to me, members, is the biggest crisis facing us. We've worked so hard as a province to get these projects packaged. There's millions of rands worth of professional fees, people's time that's lying here. It costs at least sort of 3 or 4 million rand to package a project of this magnitude, and that money's been dispersed by these social housing institutions. So that really, members, is the biggest challenge for us going forward. I think the province has done exceptionally well. It doesn't have one distressed project within the province. So we're really putting up our hand at every platform and pleading for additional funding. And that's currently where we sit. So yes, so that's pretty much it, colleagues, and then members will gladly take questions when appropriate. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Gavin. Sorry, Gavin. I have your surname, but I've started saying first names, so it's going to be first name from now on. Thank you very much. And I think, yeah, that's one of the biggest takeaways from this presentation is funding, and that's one of the biggest members. One of the biggest bottlenecks that we have in this. So I think we know what to do when we get back to the House. We know what tune to sing now and know what questions to ask on the National Minister of Human Settlements, which is important. We move on to the City of Cape Town presentations now, I think. You're going to take us through the affordable housing program, I believe. Members, it's this one, eh, Pina?
Good morning, Chairperson and members of the committee. So my name is Nomza Mumlungu, and am I audible? I'm a bit short for this mic. Can you indicate, Chair, if I'm audible? I am, okay. All right, perfect. Yeah, as I said, I'm representing the City of Cape Town, and we'll just speak on the city's affordable housing program. I think before we go into the presentation, you will notice that there will be a common thread on all these presentations. And really, the burning issue across the board is the issue of the funding that is being made available for social housing, of which we've seen quite a lot of our projects being stuck in the system. So just looking at the list of projects that have been presented by province, a lot of those projects were submitted at least a year ago. So they've been sitting with the SHRA, those applications, for a year. And what that means is that it creates uncertainty in the sector. It means that there's no progress on those developments because a lot of these SHIs are dependent on this funding in order to be able to progress the projects. In fact, if you look at the funding structure for a typical social housing project, at least 80 to 90% of that funding comes from the SHRA. So which really emphasizes the extent of dependency that exists within the sector on that SHRA funding. But how we will present today is to really just to give a view of how the city is responding how the city is responding to the program and some of the interventions that have been adopted, but also how we then segue into the future, to prepare ourselves for a different reality, so that we can minimize this reliance on state funding. So apparently I was supposed to introduce myself, so let me introduce myself. So my name is Nomzamo Mlungu. I am the head responsible for the affordable housing program within the Human Settlements Directorate at the city. I am joined by two colleagues. We've got Lawrence Valetta, who's the director within the same department, and Pogiso Molapo, who is a manager. So I'll proceed with the presentation. So, why is it not moving? Oh, there you go. So the affordable housing program within the city is underpinned by various strategic frameworks. And the most important one that we like to speak to is a mayoral priority program that came into being when the current mayor came into office. So when he came into office, he came with a set of pledges, 7 pledges, of which those pledges were converted into programs. And one of those was the release of land to enable private sector participation for affordable housing delivery. And then those programs were then translated into IDP objectives. So for the first time, we actually have objectives that speak to the affordable housing program within the IDP, just to show the level of priority that this program is being given. There's various other frameworks within the city, for instance, the human settlements strategy, as well as the municipal spatial development framework, which once again echoes the importance of this program. So within affordable housing, we've got an umbrella of programs that the city looks at. So if you look at that ladder there, right at the bottom of the rank, we've got the small-scale rental program. So the small-scale rental program is really a market-driven initiative, but we are seeing it taking significant root across the country, even more so in the Cape Town metropole. And it's really, there's 2 streams that we're starting to witness in the market, in the sense that sometimes you've got an owner developer who has accessed a housing opportunity, either privately or through the government program, and then they go on to build flats at the back of their unit. Or alternatively, you've got the more entrepreneurial developers that go and purchase stands and would develop quite a small development. What we're finding to be the typical quantum is between 20 to 25 opportunities. So this market is really actually delivering at a scale that is even higher than government is within the affordable housing program. And as a city of Cape Town, there's a recognition, and there's a recognition that it must be treated as a bona fide delivery mechanism, because we recognize that as a state, we cannot be the only pursuer or the only implementer or activator of housing in the market. Then we've got the GAP, or the First Home Finance program, which is an ownership model that is targeted at households that earn up to 22,000. And then we have affordable rental. So we've called it affordable rental / social housing. So social housing, I think that's been presented already by Provincial. So we're quite comfortable in terms of that model, which is a rental model, also targeting households up to 22,000. But what we're starting to see in the market as well now is this form of affordable rental that is being driven by private sector players. So there's a lot of examples that we're seeing in Johannesburg, all across the country, in fact, who are able to deliver within the income benchmarks that are not too dissimilar to social housing. And what we're finding there, the thresholds is sitting at about 29,000 versus the 22,000 that is coming from social housing. And these developments are happening without any state assistance. They're privately driven. And what we're finding is that a lot of them are able to raise private equity funding through international investments and donors. And it's working, and it's delivering at quite a significant scale. So there's a recognition, and there's a recognition that through the Cities Land Release Program, we need to have a way of enabling this form of delivery to also happen. And then we move on to the mixed market development. So this is a model similar to the Conradi project that was presented earlier on, that we've also adopted as a way of firstly enabling cross-subsidization between social housing, which is subsidized, with market-driven elements. And 80 to 90% of the land parcels that are being released by the city are now being released as mixed market developments. And then on the side there, we speak about the inclusionary housing policy. So inclusionary housing is also market driven, and it is a mechanism by which government incentivizes the private sector to deliver affordable housing. So i.e., if you're looking at a completely private development, we then propose a range of incentives that ensures that a certain quota of that development is dedicated to affordable housing. So I'll speak more to this further down the presentation. So this is a picture of what has been completed to date in Cape Town in terms of social housing. So we have just under 5,000 existing occupied, tenanted social housing developments in the city of Cape Town. As you can see, the program is citywide, so we're covering like a broad range of areas across the metro. Then this is an example of another integrated project, much smaller scale than Conradi, but nonetheless integrated, which is located in Bellville, Glenhaven, Bellville, and it's made up of three components, the one being an affordable rental component. So this is the model I spoke to earlier on. There is some market residential, which is being sold, as well as social housing. So if you look a little bit closer at those different components, you can see overall that development is deriving housing opportunities in excess of 1,000 units, which is really what you want to see, because what happens is that if you develop in this nature, you create opportunities for upward mobility. So as a person graduates or progresses from social housing, they then move to the affordable rental development, and then as their income or their circumstances improve, then potentially they can then move on to the units that they can buy for ownership, you know, because we understand that people's livelihoods are not static and that people are continuously growing, and people are also aspirational. So we need to respond to that aspiration in our developments. So this is just an example of the look and feel of a typical social housing unit within this development. We like to show the internal pictures just as a way of demonstrating that social housing is like, in terms of built form, it's like any other apartment block. You know, one can easily access a unit of this caliber within the open market. But the difference is that in the open market, you're going to pay market rates. I mean, in some localities, we know that social housing, you can actually pay as little as 50% of what would be the prevailing market rental within that area. So it actually contributes quite significantly in really responding to that affordability gap, particularly in the Cape Town area. So these land parcels that are here are land parcels that have been awarded since the inception of the mayoral priority program. So this is over the last 2 years, and as you can see, these ones are delivering just over 4,000 opportunities. As I've said, it's a combination of social housing and market-driven elements. An example, so this is a concept design for Pickwick Street, which is a site that is in Salt River. It is delivering 1,800 residential opportunities, which are mixed use. So you can see here on the corner that we are depicting here, there are retail opportunities on the ground, so that there's retail activation. The scheme also proposes recreational space, rooftop recreational space, so the sports facilities on the roof. It's a very well located property in the sense that it's got visibility from the Nelson Mandela Boulevard as you're driving towards the N2. Is directly opposite the Doubletree Hotel. So, and not and just a block away from Victoria Road, which is the main road here. So very easy to access the site. As you can see, that's the market value for the property, 122 million. And when we look at market value, like a lot of these sites, generally across the board, in fact, all of them have been disposed to the market at a discounted rate. And the city sees that land, those land discounts as being a form of investment, and once again, a form of incentivizing this market in order to be able to enable these affordable housing opportunities. And then here's another example, which is Newmarket Street. So this one was awarded this year in May. It's just on the at the foreshore, at the fringe of the inner city. Here we're getting 700 odd housing opportunities. Once again, mixed. Once again, ground floor retail activation. You can see the My City. There's actually a My City bus stop directly outside this development, which actually means that it's very well accessible. Then these are land parcels that we are preparing to release to the market for the current year. So we're actively working on these. Some of them have already been through a public participation process where we advise members of the public of council's intention to dispose of the sites. So we're looking at about 3,300 opportunities. And then an example is this site, which is in Ottery. And right now, this land parcel is a vacant piece of land. So what you find is that generally across the board, what we are achieving through this development is this ability to unlock the development potential of these vacant land parcels, really, and really create value that currently is dormant, you know, and in the long run, it does translate to a revenue stream for the municipality as well. So this one is being planned as social housing, and once again, you can see the value there is quite significantly less compared to the others, because of the locality that we're looking at. Kromboom, this is a prime piece of land in Rondebosch East. Is directly is being fronted by the M5 highway, so the highway that goes to Muizenberg from the city center. Looking at 800 residential opportunities mixed, so it's a combination of social housing and open market units. There's also retail opportunities, and it's a very green site currently, lots of trees. So going forward, that we wanna retain and sustain that look and feel of the site, so that whilst you've got buildings, but there's still a sense of openness. So we are at public participation on this one. Then another example, which is in Brackenfell, also a mixed use site. Here we have some gap opportunities, social housing, retail, 412 opportunities. And then moving on then to sites that we are packaging. So there was a term that was thrown around earlier on called de-risking. So this is how we de-risk the site. So what we mean by packaging is taking the sites through the planning processes to ensure that by the time we take these land parcels to the market, they have the requisite rights for the developers to be able to implement, which is a very important element, because it means that those land parcels can be translated into development within a very short space of time, and the developers don't have to carry the risk, number one, of having a vacant land parcel, but also the holding costs of having these land parcels on their books without any development being facilitated. So this is an example of a land parcel which is part of Lay. So this is quite an extensive piece of land. Overall, in extent, is more than 600 hectares, of which half of that is developable. It's an integrated development with a variety of uses, commercial uses, industrial uses, residential. We're looking at about 10,000 residential opportunities, bulk of 1.2 million square meters. So currently, the first phase of this development will be looking at 100 hectares, which will be yielding about 2,400 residential opportunities, which are mixed. So there is social housing included there. And we're also exploring really maximizing that bulk so that we can really optimize the residential opportunities that are coming from this development. So this land parcel, I should add, was acquired from AECI through USDG funding, specifically for the purposes of integrated development. And then this is another one, which is also quite a sizable tract of land, 70 hectares. Anandil also acquired privately, by the way. It's got housing opportunities, but the main mix here of complementary use is more on social amenities, particularly educational facilities. So this is on the N7 directly opposite Danone. And then here, these next slides are really looking at sites that are at a citywide level now, because social housing is not only facilitated through government land release. Sometimes the land comes from the private sector. So, for instance, Glenhaven, which is a site that I presented on, it was not a government release, it was privately bought. But then government came in with the subsidies of which the city was able to extend USDG funding of about 50 million towards that development. So it doesn't, as I said, so it comes from the private sector. So really this list just speaks to land parcels where there are already developers or social housing institutions that are progressing these developments. So and the expectation is that execution or implementation here can happen within the next 2 to 3 years. But the biggest dependency for us to being able to realize these developments, once again, is the unlocking of the SRAF funding. As you can see, we're looking at a yield of about 10,000 opportunities. In fact, if you look at the full pipeline from the sites that we've already released up to these sites that are like the packaging sites, even sites that are coming from province and these ones that are at implementation. Overall, we're looking at a pipeline of about 30,000 land parcels in the city of Cape Town that we are preparing for the program. So the need is great and the support is definitely needed for us to be able to take these projects forward. So just to speak quickly on some of the interventions that the city has adopted around affordable housing. So over the years, we've been able to package a basket of planning and financial incentives that are there to enable, first of all, financial viability, but also operational efficiency on these developments, so in the form of reduced building plan scrutiny fees, discounted land prices, which we spoke to, USDG that is made available for bulk infrastructure, DC credits. There's a special rates categorization for social housing, where social housing is rated at 25% of the market value. Once again, an incentive that is given to the developer, but the main beneficiaries become the tenants, because that incentive or those reductions are passed on to the tenants, because it means that they have to pay less for their rates, they have to pay less for the utilities. We've also had a set of council-approved guidelines around the issue of discounting land. And we've come to understand that the discounting of land cannot just be limited to social housing alone, even within those mixed market schemes, especially in Cape Town, once again, because we know property prices are relatively high in Cape Town. It becomes necessary that we're able to look at those discounts holistically when we are evaluating the land parcel. And really the main criteria, the main justification for a project to be able to access a discount is through a financial feasibility model. Because we recognize that affordable housing is not limited to social housing, the city has adopted, through a council resolution, has adopted an affordable housing definition that once again goes beyond the government thresholds, but then goes up to the market-related thresholds as informed by the Financial Services Charter, which at present is benchmarked at 29,000. So these are reviewed annually and are adjusted for inflation. So the de-risking of the sites, this has become institutionalized. At first, when we started this, it was really experimental, but we're starting to realize that it's a need to enable developments. Going forward, because we are dealing with with huge volumes, the pipeline is quite long, we do need to find more efficient ways of working. So we're starting to package the land parcels in bulk, as well as taking them to the market in bulk. Then further on, in terms of our procurement processes, we have opened up the landscape. In the past, we only used to engage with social housing institutions. However, we now also make the land parcels available to other delivery agents. So these are typically your regular private sector developers. Through this mayoral priority program, we've also been able to ensure transversal coordination of the land release program through the establishment of various governance structures within the city. We are in the process of developing an affordable housing policy, which we anticipate will be able to go out on public participation early next year. So this affordable housing policy also includes inclusionary housing elements, as discussed before. With these land releases, unlike other commercial transactions that are undertaken in other parts within the city, we don't just release and walk away. We do thorough post-award performance monitoring to ensure that delivery does occur and to ensure that the SHIs and the ODAs that have been charged with the responsibility for carrying out these developments are taking the projects through the various steps to ensure that we are able to deliver the developments within a certain time frames. So we have become quite strict. We've always done it, but I think we have amplified on this quite more recently. And then just to look at the social affordable housing trajectory within the city. So the social housing program is fairly young, but not that young, in the sense that the city has been delivering social housing since 2010. So between 2010 and 2021, we're able to deliver about 3,500 social housing opportunities through the land release program, the mayoral program. Over the last 2 years, we've actually been able to surpass the number of housing opportunities that have been created through these land parcels that have been released. And this is then projected to increase exponentially over the years as we look further ahead. So as we look ahead, once again, we need to contend with the fact that the landscape is changing, and the biggest game changer for us is the funding issue, is the availability of these government subsidies. So there are, as a sector, we are engaging across multiple platforms to really grapple or really explore alternative funding mechanisms for affordable housing in the absence of state subsidies, so that this program can be sustainable into the future. In the past, the grant funding for social housing was locally administrated. There were two pots of funds that resided within province as well as the municipality. And then in 2017, this changed and it was amalgamated into what we've come to understand as the Consolidated Capital Grant. And then the control of it then moved to national within the Social Housing Regulatory Authority. And what happens is that when all the projects are sitting in one big pot at national, the projects within each respective metro, not just Cape Town, by the way, they don't always necessarily receive priority, because you have to be able to spread the money equitably. And how they get prioritized perhaps may not be relatable to how we prioritize sites locally, particularly within Cape Town. We would want to further or progress sites that are most aligned to the program objectives, i.e. the ones that most enable the spatial transformation that we desire from this program, you know. So this is a call from the city to really reconsider where the money is located. Similarly with USDG, the city of Cape Town is able to access the money directly from Treasury, and then the money is distributed to the relevant projects. That a similar stance be adopted for social housing, that the money gets managed locally. As you look beyond social housing, we were talking about this idea of future-proofing the land release program to make sure that the land parcels that we've released can still deliver affordable housing opportunities. So the conversation now is moving towards what are the enablers that as government we can put in place to ensure that affordable housing broadly, not just social housing, is enabled and is furthered within the city. This is the end. Yeah, that comes to the end of the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's a very insightful presentation, lots of potential. Who's next?
We're done, Chair, because
Is that it?
the two projects were already presented
Okay.
by our province.
Great. Okay, so colleagues, I'm going to go over to questions now. I'm sure there's lots of questions that we're going to ask and probe. And I'll let the NCOP members go first today, seeing it as is a NCOP Provincial Week. But everybody else, please, you're welcome to ask questions as well. NCOP members, I'll go first, Mr. Honourable Godsell.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the very thorough presentations. I have a few questions, I think, perhaps to Mr. Wiseman first. The arrangement for places like the Pinelands model, sorry, what's it called? Conradi, etc. Who's responsible for the maintenance? So when you have a normal block of flats, or perhaps a a kind of security estate, you would have a body corporate and you would have levies, and obviously somebody responsible for looking after that. How does it work in these models, and also what is the government's role in this, and how much of the responsibility is then left to the owners, but also what role do the tenants play, or the people who then take advantage of the social housing? I did see the requirements in terms of income, etc., for those who wish to make use of this opportunity. I just want to know, what are the other requirements? In other words, how do you decide, or who decides, firstly, who gets to live there, firstly in social housing, the rental, and then the buy option? And I mean, can anybody do that? Is it perhaps people who live in the area? And how does that then relate or perhaps link with the other housing or infrastructure demands? In other words, people who perhaps are on a list somewhere else to receive a house, perhaps they've now in the meantime bettered themselves in terms of their profession, and they might be in a position to buy. How do you kind of set those off? Also resale, what happens if somebody wants to move on from there? Not just profit, but also again in terms of the opportunity. I had a question about the security. There was a risk, I think, by the lady over there. She spoke about de-risk. Interested to know a little bit about that, but also in terms of security. I mean, I'm assuming that would slot in with your body corporate answer. And yeah, and then I think also with the body corporate, I just want to know, so you have obviously your day-to-day running, but then also in the long term, the maintenance. In other words, who would be responsible for ensuring that these projects remain, upkeep and all of those things. And those are my questions.
Thank you very much. Are you happy that we go through all the questions, or do you want to answer one by one?
Perhaps if I could answer the first member first. I think it would.
Okay, so we can do it.
Chooses.
Welcome to do it. It's fine. We can do members' questions, and you can answer, and then we're following members' questions.
Okay, that might, because perhaps it might answer some of the other members' questions. Might be answered.
Okay, yeah, let's do that. Thank you.
No, thanks. Those are very good questions. Just in terms of the social housing program, each project there's a rigorous approval process from a viability point of view, and there's a financial model that's been established called the QuickScan C. I don't know how they came up with that word of all things, but it's the financial model that the SHRA uses. So what we call minimum investment criteria or hurdles that have to be met. So one of those is the interrogation of the operational costs of a new project. And what's really good about the program is that the social housing institution is compelled to provide for it's set at a hurdle of 1.05% of the total development cost has to be assigned month on month for maintenance, both reactive and longer term maintenance. So inherent in the overall viability of the project has to be this long-term maintenance provision. Other programs in the past haven't had that. The community residential, the CRU program, for example, hasn't had that. Whereas these institutions have to make allowance for that. So there's a year-on-year provision made specifically for maintenance, which is quite a significant amount of money. You know, I always thought about the Greenpoint Stadium when it was developed. In terms of good property management, you should allow close to, at least 1% as a bare minimum, maybe even 1.5% of the total development cost per annum to ensure sustained maintenance of such a structure. So that's built into the model, and then the social housing institution is regulated by the SHRA, where they do quarterly reporting. And part of that is speaking to maintenance provision, ensuring the long-term operation of that. So each of the institutions have a very detailed maintenance program where people log a call, and then that would be reactive maintenance, for example. Obviously, in terms of a standard lease agreement, the tenants are responsible for normal wear and tear, and if they kick or break or smash something, that deposit is asked of that person up front. There's regular inspections at every time the unit gets assigned to a certain different individual. There's an exit inspection, so that it's managed very, very carefully and very well. You'll see at the Conradi precinct particularly, they've gone for and this is the tension when you're packaging such a project. You've got the initial build cost versus the long-term operational cost, and it's that whole sort of life cycle costing dilemma. So, but what they've managed to get right at Conradi is going for a very low maintenance external facade detail. So they've used actually a standard stock brick, but in a face brick detailing. So you don't have the massive outlay of paint in the future, 3-4 years down the road, where you're having to paint large externals facades. So that is a tension. Some of the projects are painted, some aren't. So if you can get like a top end, nice face brick, then you lower significant long-term costs. But there is the provision that's made month on month as part of the overall viability of the project. So it's very positive in that sense, and it's a very good question. And I think Neil might have to help me here, but part of the Conradi model is that there's a broader homeowners association that's been set up that has its own levy structure. So part of the negotiation was to ensure that the social housing institution isn't having to carry huge amount of additional levy structure within the precinct homeowners association. I think what they've managed to get right is I think there's just really a like-for-like costing in terms of actual indirect costs or direct costs that are payable to their specific earth that sits within the broader development. The social housing institution, it holds all the rental stock as an entity. So there's no additional levy structure that's passed on to the individual tenants. All that management is retained within the institution itself. They have a house manager, they run their own maintenance teams, and they manage it in-house. So there's no, it's not subscribed to CSOS or other sort of sectional, it's not sectionalized. The block itself is retained as a one block of residential units that sits within the ownership of the SHI. So so that's how so there's no additional levy outside of the homeowners association, where in this instance we'll be paying direct costs associated with the block. The allocation policy, for what's critical to note is that the social housing institution is the one that has to, they vet and they screen and they then adopt tenants, and it's all based on affordability. There needs to be a high level of responsibility taken with the allocation of units, because every churn or every tenant that doesn't pay, there's a huge associated cost with that. So the institution itself has to be the final custodian of who gets allocated. In terms of the projects, the person would be on the city's waiting list. And then obviously they've got these defined income bands where they have to allocate folk within prescribed income. So that's the starting point. The other is too that it's not assigned to anybody that's single. There needs to be cohabitating or married or have a dependent. And then the usual subsidy type of criteria, South African citizen, over 18, and those types of issues. And then obviously, because it's a rental form of tenure, there is a detailed credit checking that has to happen. So they use TPN and various credit checks to ensure that you've got a quality tenant. And that's absolutely a prerequisite. And that's why you're ensuring high levels of rental sustainability and rental payment, because once the block is developed, there's no operational subsidy that's extended by the state. And so that institution has to stand on its own 2 feet. And so that's why the importance of good quality tenants is absolutely a prerequisite, and allowing them to manage that. So and then again, from a marketability point of view, it's sort of like an open market process. The project's advertised, people then come and apply. And then it's really sort of a first come, first served basis. There's existing waiting lists, extensive waiting lists now for the next phase. And so the projects go forward based on that process. In terms of resale, in the social housing model, there isn't any ownership transfer. The entity, the structure, the investment itself retains within the ownership of the social housing institution, and the current contract with the SHRA requires that be in perpetuity. So the social housing institution is not able to exit unless it's sort of a dramatic implosion or failure, or at which point then the SHRA would exercise its notarial deed of restriction that it has over the property. And that typically would then be assigned to another social housing institution. So that's part of the model as well, that it ensures the retainment of that state investment in perpetuity. The same also currently applies to what we call other delivery agents, which are private sector institutions that are now operating in the social housing space. They have to bring in a minimum of 20% of equity into a development. The first one's being developed now in Somerset West by an ODA, as we call it, which is a bit close to, I think it's about 700 odd units. So that's what retains the state asset. And then the individuals they're not assigned ownership, but stays a rental form of tenure. The de-risking, I think if you're speaking to security, if that's sort of individual, is that sort of access control, that type of security that you had in mind? Yeah, as I said, all the institutions typically are using biometrics to manage access control, and one of the highest operational costs for these precincts is the provision of security. So they would typically have a guardhouse with guards doing patrols, and so you're really needing a large, you want a significant mass of units in one place, close to 200, 300, like the sweet spot, to be able to carry that level of on-site operational cost. So security, in fact, is one of the biggest operational costs that the SHI has to carry on these projects. Typically, the other utilities, water, electricity, is all sort of on a prepaid basis, the Wi-Fi. And then another big key element, which the cities of Cape Town has been outstanding at, is that it provides a significant rates rebate to the institution. Without that, these projects wouldn't be viable within the Cape Town area because of high property prices. So the city's in fact created a specific category within its rates policy. Sorry, I need some water. Sorry, a specific rates category within its policy for social housing to extend that rebate. Again, and those are critical. Those are critical in terms of the longer term rollout of these projects. Remember, have I covered most? If there's one or two further points.
Yeah, just to clarify, in terms of the social housing, is the allocation of someone in one of those social housing units in perpetuity, or is there an assessment further along the line? Let's say that person or people are no longer in need of that housing.
That's also a very good question. Typically, the initial assessment and all the beneficiaries are also screened and vetted by the SHRA in terms of the allocation process. So they have to meet those set income categories. There is the realization that the institution itself is able to make year-on-year escalation to its rental. Again, that speaks to viability. That price escalation is always sort of linked to CPI at a minimum level, and is also vetted by the SHRA as well in terms of its annual year-on-year escalation. So it does reach the instance where folk on some of the top end bands that might come in for the top end units would be sitting around about 18 or 19,000 Rand. So over time, that income categorization does shift. But historically, there has been a relatively high level of churn within a unit. Over the lifetime of the building is often what they've looked at statistically. You would have at least 4 or 5 families gaining the benefit of going through that unit over time. So the institutions sign sort of annual lease agreements, and then typically with an option to renew. The SHRA also does various income surveys at certain times. So I think that there could be instances where some folk over time could stay. But what we've also found is where a person's income does really kind of, if they get a killer job and sort of take off, the level of aspiration still stays there. So, again, it becomes up to that individual in this case to then vacate. So if it often links to car ownership and those sorts of aspirations, because we have a fairly limited parking ratio, issues of security. So typically we're finding that people that are aspirant would move out, and then that opportunity would again avail itself. There isn't the leasing environment at this stage hasn't allowed for termination of a lease based on income. That precedent hasn't been set, and it certainly hasn't been tested through the Power Act or in a court of law. And it's also important that there be a level of stability within a precinct. So that with the social housing model, that has been the norm. And so generally through the environment, the context, the placing, people that are earning in excess, they typically do vacate, which then necessitates the allocation again of that unit to somebody within that categorization.
Thank you very much. Honourable Swart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for all the presentations. It's really an eye-opener of what the Western Cape and City of Cape Town is really trying to do. And that also answers one of my questions, why people are moving to the Western Cape, because, you know, we are moving. Because jobs, creating job seekers are always, you know, housing, the shortage of housing is always in South Africa is one of the big problems. But as Gavin has said, you know, there is one or two questions answered. The criteria, what is used for qualified households, I think that one was explained. And I was in the beginning, you know, and that question was also how, besides money from national treasury, the national government, but the private sector is also buying in all housing opportunities. But now, Mr. Chair, the one question or the one challenge that we have to take out is the shortage of funding. And I always, when I was the mayor, always said to the directors in MM, you have come up with plans. We can't go and fundraise without plans. City of Cape Town, and there is plans. The plans is there, but there is still a shortage of you know, interest of private people who want to invest. I was thought of, you know, there's people standing in the queue waiting for opportunities to come and invest in projects in the Western Cape. The one question that I also want to ask is, besides the rental units, how do you involve the beneficiaries in the planning of and development of their homes? If the beneficiaries, you know, want to buy or interest in, do you involve them in the planning and development of their, because I know there's public participation on the site development and the land issues, but the beneficiaries, you know, involvement in their homes. The other question is that we must go out and get more funding, but the Western Cape government are involved in so many projects within the city of Cape Town. We are representing the Western Cape, and Western Cape is broader than only the city of Cape Town. And there's so many other, you know, and there's more land in other municipal areas available. And you have learned lessons of the Western Cape and city of Cape Town. And I really would like to see that we replicate, you know, what you're doing in Cape Town, that we're taking it out to Beaufort West. You know that we in Cape Agulhas was one of the first municipalities with, besides one of the B municipalities that started with the rent to own or rent to buy units, where ASLA, and I had a huge fight of, and it's all about affordability. The middle income groups, they can't afford 5,000, 6,000 rand as a monthly payment. So it's affordability, but I'd really like to see that how we replicate this within the other parts with, you know, of city of Cape Town. And I've noticed that, and I saw there is one project in the pipeline for future development in Mossel Bay, but there's other municipalities also that we have land available, and if we can just maybe also put our focus on there. Then the other thing, I saw the prices that you charge on page, you know, the Conradi rentals. It's a 30 squares for 800 rand, or what's it, a unit. And then we've listened also yesterday when we went out to the Noon and other places, where people, the shack farmers, for a 3x3, 3x6, they're renting out shacks for 2,000 rand a month. We've experienced in Cape Agulhas in Struisbaai, where people put up a 3x3, 3x4, a shack, and the fishermen, they put 4 or 5 units in their backyards, and they charge people 1,500 rand for a 3x6 shack. No services, nothing. So that is just one thing. And then you've mentioned, you know, it's quite interesting when I've heard the challenges when you plan such a beautiful development where people on the third floor, where do they hang their washing? You've mentioned it. Did you come up with a solution? But your developments is 600 units, 600 and more. And I think there's also possibility if you can come up with the entrepreneurs development where people can, one can open a laundry services. You know, I in Cape Town, I stay alone. I take my washing to a laundry, pay 130, 150 rand, wash and iron, and I don't have need, because they're in a casa also, there was an opportunity that I have to go to stay on the third floor. But, you know, washing. I'm going to the last question now. The other thing is, I was a driver when I was there, alternative building solutions. Given the rising cost of traditional construction methods such as bricks and mortar, and the increasing demand for housing, as the Western Cape and the government, Western Cape government, Western Cape, the City of Cape Town, thoroughly investigate alternative building techniques. I can come and introduce you. I've introduced one person of Cape Town to the minister, where we bought.
1 minute, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
Where we ASLA come up of 40 squares, build it for 600,000 rand. We've got an alternative entrepreneur in 50 squares for 350,000 rand. So if I can maybe introduce those guys also to you in the short period. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Swart. It's quite extensive. Let's go over to the answers to those questions and statements. Thank you.
Thanks, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Member. Perhaps just starting on the planning of the beneficiary involvements and the planning of their homes. Again, it would speak to context. If I'm sort of wearing the social housing hat, and it also actually refers to the first home finance process as well. And remember, you'd be obviously familiar what we did in Cape Agulhas. The complexity that we have, where what's different in call it an IRDP program or something like that, where you're working with a predetermined and identified group of beneficiaries, your participation can be far more extensive. It might be around layout, it might be around whatever the implications are, and you can have those sort of planning workshops and the like. I mean, there's a high level to that happens just generally through the public participatory process, and my colleagues in Dalwin and her team are very good at that, where they're looking at where there are broader precincts that are being developed. They might have these development planning workshops where you have all the stakeholders involved, and they kind of do these charrettes, and there's different scenario planning. That is one opportunity, but that's generally done at a much bigger precinct level. Within the social housing space, the product itself is very determined and defined by the SHRA itself. We kind of, sort of what the product works, the viability, and that has to stack up. And the challenge that you have is that the beneficiaries, so to speak, it's a moving target, because remember, it's always based on current affordability. And even in the Cape Agulhas scenario, and particularly in the first home finance space, somebody's affordability can change overnight. And we see that. We see where folk get awarded a subsidy, even get extended a bond, but the bank then does a last-minute.com reassessment before they take occupation, and out of excitement they bought a lounge suite on credit, and it destroys their whole profile, and that bond falls away. So the difficulty you have, you don't know who those beneficiaries are, because it's always based on affordability credit score at the time of entry. And so that limits the ability for that sort of grassroots up planning procedures outside of the bigger public participation processes you might have, or, for example, in the instance where there's an upgrading of an informal settlement or there's a predetermined grouping of beneficiaries, that's a different scenario. And those community-based planning processes are certainly implemented. But in these two programs, it's very much the market, you sort of throw that marketing net as far as possible, because statistically you'd see that these institutions only have about a 10 or even less in some instances % hit rate. They have to process thousands of beneficiaries to actually get the beneficiaries that fully meet all the criteria, fit into those predetermined income bands, can afford it. You know, it's a very labor and administratively intensive process. But obviously we certainly do promote public participation, public planning processes. But just interesting, just anecdotally, there's a large tract of land that the National Public Works owns up towards the Melkbos side, where they, for the city for the first time, is trying to introduce a public planning process for that land parcel, and including that in its precinct planning and in a spatial development framework, which would be a first for the city, where publicly led planning ideas would be incorporated into a policy document. So yeah, we are supporting those. So that was the beneficiaries. Let me just see just to remind myself here. Yes, I'll just keep on the social housing space. Washing lines, you'll see at Conradi, for example, when we go there, the provision has been made up on the roof with covered washing lines. So it is a thing. At Maitland, you'll see that the community, the tenants have organized themselves where they assign certain washing days to each of the families, and then they rotate the length of washing line. You can get quite technical as to how much length of washing, but that's worked well there, where the tenants themselves, so you get assigned your washing day, and then you have access to washing lines. Yeah, because again, many of the institutions don't allow folk to hang stuff on the balconies and hang stuff out the windows and all that sort of thing. So, but they make it work, and in many of the projects it's a key issue in terms of the planning. Some actually have covered washing yards. You'll see at Conradi upstairs, they've got washing yards on the roof. So that is addressed on each of the project. Certainly, excellent idea around the laundry services. A number of projects that I've been involved with previously when I worked for an institution, we availed a small retail space where people had taken up a laundry, a little superette. I speak under correction, I think, there's a laundry at Conradi, you'll see it. There's a creche facility. So definitely those opportunities are there, and that's why, again, if you're able to create those little retail opportunities, they do work well, and people do take them up. In terms of outside the metro, definitely we've certainly have been taking the learnings from our City of Cape Town colleagues who are very much ahead of the curve with their thinking. We, for example, engaging with Swartland, there's a couple of exciting mixed uses opportunities there. The first out of the metro project that should be underway is in Drakenstein in the Del Yusufat area. There's a project that's been on the cards for ages, and finally they should be going to ground in October. And then obviously the project you've highlighted in Mossel Bay, there's 2 land parcels that have been available on the Mountain View. It's Mountain View project, the same road on Louis Fourie going into Mossel Bay on the left-hand side, next door to where the province did its own project. So again, we're just really waiting on funding. And I think, remember, the funding issue is a big one. And I think from the get-go, been engaging with the minister around, and it's very exciting to see what the city's done with linking affordable housing at a broader definition and attaching it to the financial sector code. And maybe just for noting, about 3.5–4 years ago, the entry level of the first home finance subsidy is obviously 22,000 Rand. That was exactly the same as the financial sector code in terms of their definition of affordability. So that was basically 3.5–4 years ago. The first home finance subsidy is still at 22,000 Rand, but the correctly applied escalation that the Banking Association of South Africa uses within this financial sector code, that amount is now sitting at 32,000 Rand. And that's a very stark reality. So the subsidy program is 10,000 Rand per unit behind in terms of affordability. So we certainly have to start to look to alternative funding methods. But the big reality is the grant funding allows that what we call deep down market reach, which allows us to penetrate the those folk that are paying 2,000 Rand for a 3x3 allows them to participate. The more push towards the top end affordable category that the private sector is operating in, you start to, it's impossible, the financials just don't stack. You crowd out that deep down market reach. And it's there, how far can we sweat the asset to try and create that subsidization? But that's the benefit of the grant. Any grant brings down the threshold for somebody of lower income being able to participate. So we're working with Swartland, we're working with Drakensberg, we're working with Mossel Bay to see how and where we can put these projects together, where we can try and extract capital value out of a pristine asset to create a level of cross-subsidization. And you can only take that so far in a residential space because the market is so price sensitive. You know, if you're paying 1.5 million Rand for your house, you're going to be loath to add another 200,000 Rand on that because it needs to cross-subsidize somebody else. We've tried it. It just doesn't work, unfortunately. And so it's tried to find other land uses that have more buoyancy and more viability to cross-subsidize. And I think when, for example, a part of Flay or, you know, those bigger precincts allows one to do that. And I think, you know, we chatted to my city colleagues earlier, you know, definitely working in close liaison with them to see how do we draw in those private sector. And then the other thing that we're working on, and it applies to Drakensberg, where we're going to pilot an affordable rental model with Swartland. The thing is, while we're also working on the legislative mechanism to ensure that the state asset isn't sort of speculated on. So what's the covenant mechanism? What's the reversion clause? How do we as government ensure that our land isn't taken and sold on or speculated on? And that's part of the deliberation that we're working with. We're working with maybe a 15-year term of ensuring that that product might be held as affordable. So those are some of the mechanisms that we collectively are working on. And I think if we can find the right instruments, the right land availability agreement clauses, then I think we're going to get a lot of traction. De-risking for the private sector, you know, be it through long-term lease or whatever the processes are, those are all iterations that we're currently looking at. And then certainly, remember, taking it out of the city to the smaller municipalities. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Member Swart, Honourable Swart, you happy? Covered? Thank you. Honourable Farmer.
Thank you, Chairperson. For me, I'd just like to just generalize my questions, and any one of you who want to answer can do that. At the start of all these projects, there might have been a stage where there was a discussion around what risk does these projects pose. And then there might have been some remedies looked at to subside the risks that might derail these projects. I would like to know how these risks were looked at and what remedies was envisaged to deal with those risks. Because in a not too distant future, these kinds of projects was also seen as a viable option to provide housing. And it was also sold as the answer to the problems we have with housing. Yet today we're sitting with the Clark Estate, Eureka Estate, Steenberg, Lavender Hill, flats that's just crime-ridden, and it's a nightmare with regards to crime. So what is envisaged for these not to end up as those did? Because I know at some stage it was a deliberate decision was taken not to pursue that kind of developments again, based on the nightmares it creates. So I would just like to understand your thinking at the time when you dealt with these kinds of risks. But then also what I struggle to understand is when there's an option to buy, which means I am then that owner of that place, what will a tenant organization do to get my drug dealer son out when I die and he inherit the place from me? So I would just like to understand your thinking around those. And then also, now here, Chairperson, I might be a bit of the point probably, but I'll ask the question anyway. How does these housing projects fit into the bigger scheme of providing low-cost housing to our people? Because it seems from outside, now I might be not privy to a lot of information, so there might be a simple answer for this one, but it seems as if low-cost housing is not really being delivered in the city of Cape Town. But yet you have quite a substantial list of this, what is this, social housing. So if someone can just maybe throw reference to the two for me. And then I think the first question already probably addressed this one. How would you explain the term good quality tenants? Then it probably won't be for me, because weekends I am a beer guy or a whiskey guy, and I love hard music and having a good time. So am I then not a good quality tenant, or what is the term? What's the word?
Thank you, Honourable Swart. I think let's go over to the answers. Thank you very much. Honourable Farmer.
I think my city colleagues can jump in as well. Sorry, Member Swart, I realised I turned my page. I didn't respond to your alternative building solutions. Just one quick comment on that is that the challenge with a lot of those is it often just incorporates the external structure itself, which only constitutes maybe 10 or 15% of the total build cost. A lot of the underlying development of roads, services, foundations, and so on still sits there: kitchens, cupboards, roofing. But certainly, if there is a service provider, we're always open to new suggestion. But I think in the higher density multi-story space, we're very much governed by structural requirements, and so that level of dealing with seismic issues and all the rest, it's still very much in the ambit of traditional construction. But we always are open. So if there is something, we can always consider that. So my city colleagues must help me here too. I think the challenge with social housing is often it is misunderstood. And again, I think every time in history people think they've got a good solution. But I think what is distinctive about social housing that is different from other previous rental stock that might have been developed through other programs that the city might have done, and I know the city sits with an extensive number of units. It does come back down to, and other member spoke about maintenance, long-term longevity. Is the requirement of those maintenance provisions, is the requirement of the cross-subsidization, is the requirement of having mixed income bands that ensures the operation and longevity of those units, is the requirement of large amounts of operational costs going to security to prevent all those issues around drugging, subletting, poor management. The sector is strongly regulated by the Social Housing Regulatory Authority, which again, previous historic rental stock wasn't. And it's been very difficult to manage that. The other important issue is that each of these projects, it's a private institution that's implementing it. And unfortunately, government is not a good manager of rentals of any stock, and because it becomes too politicized. And so the importance of these developments is that there needs to be an arm's length transaction done that depoliticizes these developments. Where there's been political interference in any of these developments, it's been disastrous. And there are one or two examples of that. So that is part of the program that has to ensure the sustainability, and those institutions need to be able to manage those units very, very efficiently and very well. And they need political support to be able to do that. So that in our mind would very much prevent some of the historic rental stock that is in great disrepair, that is managed. It's very, very difficult for the municipality, for example, to manage that. And so again, we hope by nature of the model, with the viability, with the feasibility, with the good management, it will prevent that longer term view. Just as a matter of interest, where there's been a lot of NIMBYism in other areas where we've been trying to do social housing, we've done a separate survey, and Department of Environment and Planning helped us with that, and I think some of my city colleagues helped with some of that information. There was a survey done of a social housing project that was done very much in a suburban area where the land value or the valuation role was tracked. There was no devaluing of the surrounding properties because the units well managed, properly managed, well maintained. And so that's where you're able to de-risk the site. And I think a lot of it does come down to information and almost educating the public, the private sector and people around social housing, because the terms get used so badly interchangeably that we always have to say you need to come and see a project, and hopefully you will get a taste and a sense of what a well-managed social housing project looks like. It's difficult to describe to you until you experience it, and I'm hoping that will be your experience today. And that's a key element with any future projects that we will be undertaking. The issue of low-cost housing, member, I think again, I think it's the recognition that there are different programs, and different programs speak to different needs. And again, our plea was around more funding to the social housing program, because as I highlighted earlier, the social housing program by nature allows a significant impact on folk that would historically have been called low cost. Remember that at least 30% of the units have to go for folk earning below 6,700 Rand. And if you think about the historic 3,500, which has been unchanged for years, that really is sitting more at like 5,500, 6,000, 6,700. So these projects allow at least 30% of the units to house those folk that historically might have been called low cost. Remember, it's going down as low as 1,850 Rand. So a lot of those typically would have some form of income. So the social housing program doesn't speak, in fact, does speak to that. Then recognizing there are unique instances with, upgrading of informal settlements or the IRDP, historically B&G projects, where people get access to ownership. Again, that's a different model. And I think just at policy level, South Africa is historically has always been very ownership orientated, but if you compare to other cities and other places in the world, there's a much higher rental tenure, much higher. And I think, again, that's part of, and again, with the changing nuclear family, with new generations coming through, they have a very differing view. And I think rental is still a key element. It allows people to transition. It allows people to change or downscale. If they get into distress, they can rent out a smaller unit. There's levels of indigency that all these institutions run if people fall on hard times, which tries to speak to affordability at a much higher level. And I think certainly does speak to that. And then I think in terms of good quality tenants, there's two issues to that. The one would be when I probably used good quality tenants initially was around the initial tenanting, and that speaks to the capacity to pay and to be able to pay. There's like two different measures. The one is affordability, but the one is also like the propensity to pay. Because we found over the years that people no longer prioritize the payment of rental over above a cell phone or other, historically, and in fact, in other countries in Africa, we've done research and engaged with countries, there's a much higher propensity to pay for accommodation than in South Africa. And there's a lot of other reprioritization of funding. So you also got to measure that persons, they can afford it, but they might not want to prioritize it. So a good quality would be getting a tenant that can pay and wants to pay and will pay. And you do detailed screening and checking of that. So that's at the one level of good quality. The other comes down to house rules and the management within the precinct. And each of these institutions, I don't want to use the word rule it with an iron fist, but people are made aware of the house rules. They write a test at the time of tenancy to make sure they understand the lease terms, the lease agreement, the house rules, and they're held to that. And again, it's a responsibility of all the tenants to uphold one another in that space. And so if somebody's rowdy and making noise and harass, and then they will be attended to, and if necessary, they will be evicted. Again, from that point of view, and it speaks to your last question, member, around the ownership. Remember, it's always a rental form of 10 years, so there's no transfer of ownership. And most institutions now are using a year lease agreement. So if you're generating a whole lot of red dots against your name when it comes to rent renewal, we will say thanks, Mr. Whoever. We've enjoyed your presence, but we feel you might be suited to live somewhere else, and then that rent agreement won't be renewed. So the precincts are very well and tightly managed, and that's a key element of the program. Thanks. I don't know if my other city colleagues here, Lwazi.
Thanks, Gavin. I think you have covered most of the questions, but I thought I'll just emphasize one or two issues. I think around the risks with the projects, the example that is normally used is Villa within the city of Cape Town. The program itself, it has matured over the last 26 years, with the SHRA Act having been passed around 2008, and Villa being one of the pioneers that was developed post that passing of that act. And I think a lot of lessons were learned, and a lot of issues were obviously addressed in the process. We do not have any other example within the city of Cape Town where similar issues that happened within that project have actually been reported. I think it goes to the model of delivery, the strong partnerships that actually exist between national government, the provincial government, and the city, and the regulator, that is the SHRA. I think within the SHRA themselves, I think they did pass the regulations, and then they also strengthened their own compliance systems. So you would hear from all the examples that have been made in this platform that there is very strict and tight controls that are actually in place. And when you also go and visit some of the sites that we'll be visiting today, you will see testimony to those type of controls and strength that is within the programs. So I think, yes, lessons, mistakes were made in the past. Teething issues as well around the program. But also because you've got the private sector also, working with the city or with the government. There are certain roles and responsibilities that the government has over the project, and then there are also responsibilities that the developer or the SHI in this case has over the tenants, and then the regulator's responsibility as well. But I should say that a lot of effort was put in place collectively to actually address some of those issues. But because it was a bad example, it will always, stick up whenever issues of, for example, social housing is actually raised. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Honourable Farmer, you covered. Thank you very much. Honourable Baines.
I'm so short. Thank you, Chair. Let me also welcome the presentations. For me, I think it was excellently done. Yesterday, I was a little bit unsure, but today I can see the purpose of us being here. I'm partly covered by the past, my colleagues. I was also worried about the bracket of the community that cannot afford these houses. But I think he explained the bracket above 3.5 that can go into the government houses, and the people below the income of this affordable houses. I was a little bit worried about them, but they also covered that. Then my first question that I wrote down was also good quality tenants, and I think he also explained it. So I'm covered, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honourable Baines. I must also just add that 3 of my questions have already been answered, so I've got 2 left. I'm hoping that it'll be covered by the questions that's going to be asked now. So I'll allow the members of the legislature, the committee members, if they want to ask questions, and then I'd like to ask Salga if they want to ask questions as well. And then we want to, any other stakeholder that's still here that want to ask questions. So bearing our time in mind, we've got some 20 minutes to go. Can I ask any member of the legislature if you want to ask questions, please? Honourable Bryant? Sorry, Member Bryant. I keep on forgetting I'm in the legislature.
Yeah, call me whatever you like, it doesn't matter. I think I'm the only member of the legislature here, aside from my colleague over there. Have we got anybody? Oh, okay. All right. Thanks. Couple of questions. The first one is just in terms of the definition of a well-located area. I know in the past there's been a lot of discussion around building affordable housing and inclusionary housing in CBD areas, or as close as possible to where the economic nodes are. And I'm feeling from some of the presentations there's been a shift towards locating closer to transport nodes, so ensuring that people are able to get to and from their places of work, as opposed to trying to locate everything in areas where your property prices and potentially your rates are going to be exorbitantly higher. So if you can maybe just talk a bit whether or not there has been a shift in terms of that. Obviously, it's not going to be viable for us to move everybody into the CBD, for instance, but to see these catalytic projects being rolled out, some of them after many years of planning and some potential delays as well. And just in terms of that, because I think so much of this is going to be about ensuring that you have the correct people at the sort of spear point, so to speak, of delivery. So having effective NPOs and developers that you're working with in order to carry this out. And I know, I think Mr. Wiseman mentioned a group called DCI Holdings. That was the name you used, I think, with the Goodwood project. Now, I understand that one was delayed because of some contractor issues in the past, in 2019. But who goes about appointing, for instance, DCI Holdings? Is that the province? Is that the city? Is that the national government? And would DCI Holdings, for instance, be part of a much broader competitive process? And how does one go about selecting that particular entity? And then I suppose, I mean, I've got lots of questions, but I've raised many of these over many years with my city colleagues in the past. Pukisa and Osama, good to see you both as well. But I think just one of the last ones is in terms of this call for government subsidies. And I mean, I know this is a challenge, I think, for all governments and, provincial and local at the moment, trying to get funding from National Treasury in order to make projects sustainable and provide services, etc. But, I think one of the key selling points of some of these affordable housing and inclusionary housing and social housing projects has been the model which is designed to provide incentives when it comes to the cost of properties, down to about 10% in some instances of the original valuation, as long as those valuations are accurate, obviously, but accurate valuations can go down to 10% of that valuation. And then this kind of cross-subsidizing model, which is also intended to ensure that revenue that's generated is plowed back into the facility. So the government subsidies that are being spoken about, what aspect of it is it? Your sort of original, your kind of cost to put your initial contractors and things in place, or what is the subsidy for when you have these models that are intended to cross-subsidize? I'm just trying to balance the discussion here for my own understanding. Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much. Member Bryant, let's go with the answers.
Thanks, Chair. Let me just attempt maybe the first step at the questions. I think when we talk about well located, we're looking at a number of components. So being in the CBD where there is higher and hype of activity, especially economic activity, becomes well located. And there are projects, I think the city has shared projects that they're busy planning, and some are in the implementation or packaging that are within the CBD. We also have some, which I've said we're not going to speak about at this point in time. So there are projects that are being rolled out for implementation within the CBD. However, we realize that also there are other nodes within, for instance, if you're looking at the Cape Town metropolitan area, like your Bearville and others, where we also need to look at how do we rejuvenate those nodes and have economic activity and on the nodes, and then be supported so that people don't have to travel to Cape Town, but we make sure. So it's mixed. It's not necessarily focusing on Cape Town as the node only, but it's also focusing broadly within the Cape Metro. And of course, the transport is a factor, because we also don't want people to be flocking to Cape Town because there are no job opportunities or economic opportunities or schooling opportunities, other social services opportunities where they reside, and not creating dormitory settlements. Because if we put everybody to come on the bus or train to come to Cape Town, then we perpetuating the special policies of the past. As far as procurement is concerned, I'm going to talk from the province side on the mixed-use development, which I think would be similar to the city. We put the projects out on open tender. So if I take the case of Conradi, the project was out on open tender. It had all the requirements as per the approvals of the city, as well as what the objectives of the project were. So there shall be social housing, there shall be this. Now, in a particular project, a social housing institution that have both a financial and technical capability could have bidded for the whole procurement, for the whole project, and delivered that project. Because remember, one of the SHRA conditions is that social housing component, as Gavin has said, must be owned by an SHI. However, in the case of Conradi, a developer that is not an SHI bidded for the development, but had to bring in a partner called New Haven. Own Haven, New Haven, it is new, to be able to deal with the social housing component. but it was an open tender process, which was then assessed within the department by our transaction advisors and department officials, and then came to a conclusion after the numerous checks of the open procurement. The issue around government subsidies now, the government subsidies are a competence of the national department in terms of the quantum and in terms of the norms and standards. So when they say if you earn X amount and therefore you qualify for a subsidy of X amount, that comes from national. And if they say, for instance, social housing or even your BNG, they say X amount of subsidy that will give shall provide for a size X of a unit, that comes from national department. So the amount that is a subsidy, it's basically saying if you get a unit, that unit is going to cost X, must cost X amount. And that goes all the way from the bulk and whatever service that is provided. So that unit will cost 10 rands, let me say, and that is the 10 rands that the national department provides as a subsidy. Now, because of land cost and other things, you'll find that the unit actually doesn't cost 10 rands, it actually costs 15 rands. But government subsidy is only giving you 10 rands. This is where now the cross-subsidization comes into play, that if we have a mixed use, we've got commercial, we've got open market, we can actually add in the 5 rands, which does not come from the subsidy amount, but it's coming from the development itself and even the discount on the land price, so that the developer can afford to provide for the 5 rands, which is missing.
Thanks. Just some additions, and then my colleague is also going to come in. So around the well-located areas, particularly within the city of Cape Town, it is, you're correct, Honorable Member, in terms of the definition, transport, economic opportunities, social amenities. What the city has done is that they've taken through to council to pass a resolution around what are known as restructuring zones across the city. So that takes well-located land from the main CBD to across the various aspects or the various places within the city of Cape Town. This is why we've got, for example, a project being implemented in the Strand, in Somerset West. Almost the entire of the city of Cape Town, Honorable Member, is the different corridors constitute restructuring zones. And this was only gazetted by national government late last year, around September. The 3 projects that we're going to visit, they are in the Vuatreca corridor, which is one of the restructuring zones, which spans from as far afield as Belleville and beyond, and comes straight and links with the CBD. So that is one of our key restructuring zone, where you've got access to transport, amenities, as well as economic opportunities, industries, and so forth. So those are the key considerations that we take. And indeed, we've got quite a lot of projects that are actually planned across. I'm sure you've seen Brackenfell and so forth as part of the presentation that we provided. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honourable Brand. Member Brand, are you covered?
Yeah, I think I'm covered unless anyone wants to add anything else.
Member Petrus, you want to have a bite of the cherry?
Thank you, Chairperson. Good morning, colleagues. Chairperson, there are more than 2 million people now excluded from this debate. Also, other municipalities as well in the Western Cape. How can we include them, make them part of this debate in the near future?
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chair. Member, in terms of the social housing program, and my colleague Lwazi referred to it, In terms of this program itself, it can only occur within what they call restructuring zones. In other words, it meets certain criteria, certain development objectives around being well located next to amenities, work, schools, and the like. What the province had done and what's been gazetted by the national department, because they're the ultimate custodians of where these restructuring zones sit. There's a number that have been identified. There are 11 leader towns outside of the Cape Metro that have been identified as restructuring zones. Saldanha Bay, Swartland, Drakenstein, Mossel Bay, Oudtshoorn, Knysna, Beto. I don't know how many that's. So those have all defined restructuring zones currently where social housing can take place. So currently we're looking at a project in Beto. There's one or two opportunities in Knysna, and George, is the other key one, where they've been involved with packaging a future social housing program. We're working with Swartland on a number of opportunities. Mossel Bay is already assigned and awarded. And I think maybe back to Member Brian's comment as well, the DCI, for example, came through the PRASA land. So there's a number of institutions. For example, there's a project in Beto that we're considering where a private landowner is desirous to do a social housing project. So there wouldn't have been any procurement process. Same with PRASA. Like PRASA had its own procurement process and assigned. So it's a bit of the province or the city has its own functionality testing where it does its own land release. In the province has its own processes as well, but we've learned, I think there've been a number of iterations and learnings around that to refine the functionality requirement through any RFP process to ensure compliance, to ensure that we get the right entities on board, and we're becoming better at that, and that is an iterative process. So to the member, to the number of the other options outside the Cape Metro, we are looking at that and looking at other affordable housing initiatives as well, using the First Home Finance Initiative as well, where we're looking at these integrated developments and trying to see how to optimize that. And I think, just coming back to Member Brian's comments as well around the discounting of land value, that is a key element where the city has also again shown us the way, and they've been very proactive with that. But for other municipalities, what we're battling with at the moment is the adoption of those smaller municipalities of an incentives package. Because it's not just the land value. The land value is honestly, it's a small lever. Typically a project could carry around about 10 or maximum up to 15% of the total development cost can be assigned to enabled land. If the number goes higher than that, any development project's not going to be viable. So that's where the city's been very proactive. But what we're seeing is that's not enough to make a project viable. And so a longer term incentive package has to come alongside that. And that's where we're battling with the smaller municipalities because they have a smaller rates base. They're very, very nervous. And so there needs to be a relevant assigned rates rebate is a critical one. There's the issue of development contributions and the payment thereof. There's issues like service connections, any sort of other indigent subsidies that can be provided. Those, in fact, are the crucial elements that will create the possibility of implementing a project. Outside of the land value, yes, that's key, but it's the other basket of incentives that has to come alongside that. And we're working closely with multiple municipalities along with the SHRA, with their capacitation workshops and programs where we're trying to take, again, lessons learned from our city colleagues and using that or taking those at least to other municipalities. Stellenbosch is another one where we're working. They've actually trying to award a piece of land. I was with them on Monday where we had a full day workshop dealing with some of the complexity of this. And it's an education because we find that, and I know Pochisa and the Nonzama and team, they're constantly fighting with the other line departments where they suddenly choose not to know what affordable housing is, and then they want to charge full rates or full plan scrutiny fee, and then Nonzama and Pochisa have to go bang on some doors. So it's that level of education that needs to happen within the various line departments. And then I think the subsidy, the government subsidy, the issue of land enablement is a key one. And I think what needs to be noted for the Conradi Park project, there was a significant amount of additional funding put in to enable that land parcel. And when I say enable, it's to ensure the necessary bulk services, link services. And that's where the growing cross-subsidization process needs to happen. And when you're able to bring in a government housing program into a project, it does open up other subsidies. And so it's a bit of a trade-off between how much you can load that subsidy versus, you've got to get the benefits and those trade-offs. And what we're finding in particularly in other municipalities is always the question of what element of the development leads first. On a big site, do you take the chance and put down the commercial element first and then come with the subsidized component later? Or in some instances, you need to bring the subsidized component in first to release some of the other grants that come into it. So it's quite a chicken and egg situation. I think that's where we're trying to work more almost with the developer hat on for ourselves and the city, where we're trying to have those conversations to see how we can, dare I say, like sweat the grant, sweat the asset, to see which leads first, allow a reasonable markup for developers, because development is high risk, but yet trying to ensure the best affordability. So we're seeing that in municipalities, and we're trying to take our learnings as far as we can go with that. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Member Peters, you covered. Thank you very much. Members of SALGA, welcome Councillor Hubert. He's the Provincial Chair of SALGA, so Western Cape Provincial Chair, welcome. You can ask your questions.
Chairperson, thank you very much. Let me just indicate, first of all, SALGA will submit the submissions at the end of the week. However, we want to welcome the presentation and express our sincere gratitude for the city as well as the province for the effort they've put in accommodating the population of the Western Cape with housing needs. Chairperson, there's just one or two questions for clarity. The one is that would like to know, what is the city's housing list, waiting list look like? How many people are there? How many people from the waiting list did benefit through the social housing in the city itself? And then, Chairperson, also with regard to the housing, social housing at the present moment, when it gets advertised by the housing agency, the beneficiaries, are they being selected by the agency's waiting list or by the city's waiting list? What list are they being chosen from? I also want to know, Chairperson, in terms of the unemployment, we've seen unemployment have increased. At the present moment, these social housing, what is the turnover in these social housing units or the eviction rate? Just to get an idea also for our submission. Then the other one, which I also would like to understand, Chairperson, is that your 22 census shown a great migration from other provinces, mostly your Gauteng and your Eastern Cape, where not individual persons are moving, but where they as families are moving. How do the city as well as the province anticipate to handle that challenge? Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hubert. Over to the administration.
Yeah, I'll start with the database question. I think it's a very important question. So in terms of the social housing program, we definitely, social housing, we rely on the city's database, but it's not, in BNG, let's start with BNG. BNG, when the database was created, was for people earning below 3,500. So that was for BNG, basically, specifically. But then social housing, if you can remember, is for people up to 22,000, which are people who are not necessarily into the database. So what we do, we encourage people that are applying for social housing to also apply, also put their names into the database so that we can account for them as well. So we also have an agreement with the social housing companies that they should also use the city's database and encourage the tenants also to register on the city's database.
Thanks. Just a quick addition. So in terms of what is our current waiting list or database, we're sitting at just over 400,000. So to be exact, about 410,000. As this is the latest figure.
Remember, just in terms of eviction rates, again, the current repayment, so we sort of view it in two ways. The one would be looking at the levels of bad debt or outstanding or rent arrears. But the majority of projects we're currently running, the repayment rate, you're looking at least sort of 98, 99% in most. So in some instances, there would be sort of maybe 2 or 3 evictions on the odd occasion type of thing. So at the moment, the actual evictions are really low in terms of that. And I think I referenced previously quality tenants. And that's important, you know, from the upfront, you really want those people that have the ability and the willingness to pay. And that's why that process is tiresome, but it's important. And then obviously people, as we've mentioned, each of the institutions has an indigent type policy. So if somebody does fall on hard times, they're given a rent holiday, so to speak. They're given a number of months to try and get themselves rehabilitated. They might also be right-sized, for example, to try and assist them. So what we're finding is there's very limited sort of current churn in the units in terms of evictions. So the numbers are low. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hubert, just for Salga, we've got to, I'm sorry to ruin your day, but your submissions must please be in by tomorrow morning, if possible, for Salga, because we've got to set up our report by Thursday evening and then present it in Parliament on Friday morning.
Thank you, Chairperson. We will do so if need be. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there anybody else who'd like to ask a question before I ask my 1 or 2 questions? No? Just the first question is just something I picked up now, that I think you mentioned that the waiting list is 210,000. 400,000. Just is that based on the same, the normal parameters of under 4,500 rand and over a certain age? I think it's 65, or to be on the indigent housing list or waiting list. That's the first question. And then just so this is not a trick question. Remember, the NCOP is here to come and do fact finding, to get answers, and then to take it back into recommendations into Parliament. And I've picked up something in the presentation where I think it was on the city's presentation where you mentioned the evolution of grant funding to municipalities. Now, I think at the moment we have issues with municipalities running out of money, just because they haven't got income from ratepayers or whatever the case might be, and they're starting to use MIG funding for payment of salaries, etc., etc. So, what safeguards would you suggest be put in place when we look at the devolution of grant funding to municipalities, so that money is actually used for the intended purpose? What safeguards would you suggest we put in place for that? And that's basically that. Everything else was answered. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Chairperson. I think the first aspect, yeah, the 410 is different categories. So in there, as Professor has indicated, you will have your below 3,500 applicants who are mostly looking for either a BNG opportunity, or in our case within the city of Cape Town as well, we use the same thresholds to allocate opportunities to our communal residential units, which is our CRU programs. But then you also have got people within the gap space who are also actively looking for opportunities. So we encourage everyone who is looking for an opportunity to register. Hence the numbers are quite high. And as indicated as well, when it comes to the social housing programs, we also ensure that the SHIs enrolls their applicants into the city database, so that we can also see who has been assisted and who has not been assisted. Then, with regards to the second question, and I'm sure maybe my colleagues will also come in from province, I think we've indicated that previously. That was the case just before around 2017, 2016, where the grants were going directly to province, and then the province would work with the city in terms of the allocations. So there were very tight controls in place, governance mechanisms in place, and it was working. But what it did is that it allowed the province to steer the agenda of how the program is actually being rolled out, obviously across the province, without over-reliance on the decision makers that are sitting within the national space in the form of SHRA in this case. So that was the situation before, and obviously now with the current challenges and uncertainty within the market, I think the city is still pushing. There are other advocacy initiatives that are led by the executive mayor and the MMC with national to try and push this view to say maybe there should be consideration to devolve back the funding back to province and the cities, just like the cities are also administering, for example, USDG. So on record as well, USDG, which is equivalent of MIG, by the way, the city of Cape Town has been consistently performing anything between 95 and 100% over the years. So it just shows also track record, of performance. Perhaps maybe one head will not fit, all. There could be consideration for merit, and merit can always be achieved through accreditation or an assignment or whatever form that national could consider, just to ensure that there is proper governance in the administration of the funding that comes to the municipalities. Gavin?
Thanks, Loazi. Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, the part of our deliberation with the whole funding debate and stuck with all these packaged projects, and it touches a little bit on what my colleague was saying, what the city's doing. The realization that all the money for social housing has been rolled up into what they call now the consolidated capital grant. It used to be two separate subsidies, the institutional subsidy and the restructuring capital grant, and it was all rolled up now to the SHRA. And what's happened now is that the national department then is the sole custodian. It's just cut, is top sliced from vote 8, the little bit of portion that they deem necessary to go to the SHRA. And that's where we're saying, guys, what was the determination of that? That's where we're saying, please, at least make it 10, 15% of the program. But now the way that funding, as I understand it, gets allocated to the SHRA is sort of different from the normal business plans through the other programs, the HSCG funding and the upgrading of the informal settlements program funding. That comes through the business planning process and happens through that process. I think what we're also trying to ask, and what I've been asking, is if we could just have some level of agility to be able to reprioritize. As you know, the human settlements environment is so incredibly volatile, and it's so difficult in the lead times for projects. You're on your way to something, and then the construction mafia jump on board, or there's some unforeseen circumstance, and then suddenly you're stuck with this project's now. Historically, there was always the agility within the province to be able to reallocate funds within human settlements, but have that custodianship. That's been stripped away completely. And the complexity too, where you've got misaligned financial years between the national province and the city, with this required gazetting of everything and not 1 cent spent if it hasn't been gazetted. It's terribly administratively tiresome. And that in itself procedurally is causing a huge delay. So what we're trying to ask is, particularly even in the social housing program, is can there be a level of flexibility where those decisions are made? Because now the SHRA really is the sole custodian as to how and which projects it funds. And we've got no real input in that, and they spoke about they were creating their own sort of prioritization matrix, and that hasn't happened. There's been no real grounds for that. But I think we're just pleading from the city and the province's side is there some mechanism in terms of, be it through MTech or whatever other financial platforms and budget planning procedures, where we can at least put up our hand. We've forwarded our business plan to the SHRA year on year, showing like this is our 10,000 unit pipeline. But now already we're hearing in the corridors that these targets have already been predetermined and the allocation predetermined for the next 5 years. And we're saying, how and where did that happen? Has this even been accounted for? And we're trying to at least get that level of dialogue where we can show we've got a package, 10,000 unit package pipeline. Surely somebody wants to fund this. And it's those mechanisms that, and I know there's certain frameworks and the like, but that's our plea too, is to at least enable us to have levels of agility, to be able to, when there's delay, re-subsidize, prioritize, and you have to be agile on your feet in human settlements. And that's where the administrative processes are really bogging us down. And I think that's where it could be, is there dialogue or is there a space to advocate for rethinking that? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. I think, and I'm very aware that I'm standing between everybody and lunch, so that's a dangerous place to be. And you are all please welcome to join us for lunch. I think there needs to be more engagement. And I think it'll happen over lunch. We need to talk to each other and see what we can do in the National Council of Provinces, how we can frame our questions to national government and how we can lobby to try and assist where we can. There's one thing that I picked up, and I've got a whole list of things here that Jason has been writing. Continued monitoring and evaluation, stakeholder engagement, future developments, funding security, and how the national government needs to come to the party with more funding. We will take all the takeaways from this into our recommendations that we're going to discuss amongst each other on Thursday afternoon, and then finalize our resolutions and take our recommendations to the National Council of Provinces on Friday morning. I think the one thing that I picked up today is how, and you just mentioned it now, the agility of the social housing programs. You have to be agile because every single project is different. And in national government, there's specific parameters for everything, and they want everything done with checks and balances. And so there's going to have to be a sort of a leeway that takes place between grant funding coming from government, the conditions thereof, and how you apply those grant funding at the social housing level.
So, sorry, Chair, just what I forgot to say is it's even for us as a province and the city to be able to reallocate between programs, that level of agility. So if there's for some unforeseen reason, a slowdown on one of the other programs, can we not then use that money and redirect that to ring-fenced social housing? And that mechanism is just not there. So that's also part of the agility, is for us to be able to be agile between our programs, so we can manage development risk, and that's a key advocacy or lobbying point. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much for that, members. We're going to break for lunch now, and I think yesterday we finished quite early with lunch and ended up waiting around for the transport to go to our site visits. So let's stick together at lunch. When we finished, I think today our transport has been pre-arranged, hopefully. When we get down, if we get down early, then we can spend more time on the site visits, which I think is going to be very interesting and informative. Just a reminder that our site visits, it's Parliament that goes to that site. So the normal rules of engagement with regards to our committee rules will be in play on our site visits as well. So just keep it in mind. Thank you very much. Enjoy your lunch. Meeting adjourned.